These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps Hair Loss Treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Russia Trap, How Our Shadow War with Russia Could Spiral into Nuclear Catastrophe by George S. Beebe. This is from the introduction. This book is a pre-mortem, an examination of a failure that has not yet happened. It focuses on one of the most difficult problems that statesmen face, how to anticipate and avoid a war that no one wants and few believe is likely or even possible, but nonetheless arises because of a combustive mixture of clashing ambitions, new technologies, misplaced fears, entangled alliances and commitments, domestic political pressures, and mistaken assumptions about how adversaries might react. In other words, it's about diagnosing and diffusing a nascent World War I problem with Russia. What was then called the Great War produced what was arguably the greatest man-made catastrophe in human history. It ended a century of relatively peaceful balance of power among Europe's leading states. It destroyed the Ottoman Empire and laid the basis for a century of war and terrorism in the Middle East. It hastened the demise of the British Empire and led to Hitler's rise, the destruction of World War II, the tragedy of the Holocaust, and the development of nuclear weapons. It paved the way to Soviet communism and decades of Cold War that spanned the globe. It decimated a generation of Europeans and left in its wake a nihilistic philosophical legacy that has devastating consequences for societies across the Western world. And almost no one saw World War I coming. World War I resulted more from miscalculation and ineptitude than from design. Historians have long debated which of the combatants bore the most responsibility for the conflict, but few dispute that each of the major powers contributed its quota of short-sightedness and irresponsibility to the disaster. Germany feared encirclement by France, Russia, and Britain, but ham-handedly threatened each in ways that encouraged them to unite in an unprecedented alliance against Berlin. That alliance, in turn, cemented Germany's dependence on Austria-Hungary and ultimately made it a hostage to its southern neighbors' actions. Britain believed the alliance would contain Germany's growing military and economic might, not lock London into a set of rigid commitments that made diplomatic resolution of a localized conflict all but impossible. Austria-Hungary's fear that nationalism could tear its empire apart from within blinded it to the dangers that a limited war in the Balkans could quickly spin into a catastrophic European conflagration. Tsar Nicholas II assumed that a limited mobilization against Austria-Hungary would deter aggression against Russia's friend, Serbia, only to learn that his general staff's war plans mandated a full mobilization against Austria-Hungary and Germany. The spread of railway technology in turn meant that any state that did not mobilize its army quickly in response faced the near certain prospect of a rapid military defeat. The result was a potent mix of volatile ingredients that fueled what Henry Kissinger called a political doomsday machine, susceptible to any number of political triggers. Few people in Washington today believe that our tense relations with Russia pose this type of challenge. Rather, the dominant paradigm for understanding and responding to the Russian threat is, quote, the World War II problem. American editorials and op-eds about Russia abound with disparaging references to Munich, where British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain made his tragic bid to appease Hitler's territorial ambitions in 1938 and achieved his ill-fated peace in our time. During the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign, Democratic Party candidate Hillary Clinton explicitly warned that Moscow's claims that it must protect Russian minorities in the Ukraine echoed Nazi Germany's arguments that it had to protect German minorities in Poland and Czechoslovakia. Similarly, Senator Lindsey Graham and many other Republicans have likened Russian President Putin to Adolf Hitler, while newspaper columnists referred to him as Putler. Like Hitler, Putin is perceived as an authoritarian leader harboring deep resentments over lost territory and unfair treatment. Like Hitler, Putin is believed to regard calls for diplomatic compromise as signs of weakness that he can exploit. And like Hitler, Putin is thought to harbor expansionist designs that will be curbed only by pushing back now before he grows too strong. For those who see the Russian threat through this prism, the chief danger is the Kremlin's aggressive intentions, and the imperative is to deter aggression through strength. Wars often happen because those who start them think they can win. Disabusing an aggressor of that belief, therefore, is critical to preserving the peace. For intelligence analysts, this translates into a focus on studying Russian war plans and weapon systems while looking for signs of impending attack. U.S. and NATO military experts analyzing Russia's preparations for its large West military exercise in 2017, for example, issued warnings that the event could be a Russian Trojan horse, masking preparations for occupying Belarus or invading one of the Baltic states. British intelligence officials caution that Russian cyber operators have acquired the ability to shut down power plants, hijack air traffic control, and even turn off air conditioning systems. U.S. intelligence community leaders sound alarms about Moscow's desire to undermine Western democracy and destroy the post-World War II international order. Hollywood actor Morgan Freeman, sponsored by a committee that includes former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, solemnly warns America in a viral social media video that we are at war already with Russia and must fight back or suffer defeat. Not everyone views Russia as offensive-minded, however. A smaller and less popular school of thought sees Russia under Putin as a weak and declining power. The book, The Russia Trap.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Wednesday. And in our second hour today, NBC reporter Jacob Soboroff is going to be with us. And we're going to be talking about this absolute tragedy of children who have been separated from their families by the Trump administration and put into concentration camps. We're also going to be asking the question, why is Donald Trump letting us die? We had this conversation back in March. Why? And back then we were talking about tens of thousands of people dying. We'll get into that in the second hour of our program. In our third hour, Dr. Stephen Amstrup is here with us. We could lose every polar bear in the world within 70, 80 years. The situation with global warming has become a full-blown crisis, and that's, if nothing, just meta to that. But it's our first hour Wednesday. It's time for Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. Pocan, POCAN.house.gov is his website, and his Twitter handle is Rep. Mark Pocan, MARKPOCAN. And Congressman Pocan, welcome back. Oh, and he will be taking your calls for the hour at 202-808-9925, by the way, if this is the first time you've tuned into the program on a Wednesday morning. Congressman Pocan, greetings. What's going on in Congress? What's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I was very glad to be here with your listeners. Yeah, I think the main thing on my mind is just this COVID package. Unemployment extension ran out last week. The eviction protections run out this week. And we've got a lot of people still hurting through no fault of their own, people who've lost their job through no fault of their own, small business owners who've lost demand through no fault of their own. And we still have, unfortunately, a raging pandemic raging in the United States more than almost anywhere else because of the ineptitude and the negligence of this president. So we've got to get this package done quickly. I don't think it's going to be this week. I think it would be pretty tough. We're hoping it'll be next week. But we really have to get something that puts people and workers first, not big business liability. And I mean, for crying out loud, they have funding for F-35s in the Republican COVID package. I don't know. I missed that new feature of the F-35 that feeds people and pays your rent. But those are the sorts of crazy things the Republicans are proposing during this pandemic.
I understand they also want to limit liability if a corporation makes a specific decision that hurts or injures. In fact, they even want to do away with malpractice insurance for a while. And this follows the Trump ordering meatpacking workers back to work with a federal executive order that eliminates any possibility of their saying no, eliminates their possibility of getting unemployment insurance if they say, no, I can't do that. I've got somebody at home who's 60 years old or has asthma or whatever. What are these people thinking, Congressman?
They're just thinking about their base and, quite honestly, their donors. They want to turn the clock back 50 years to when employers had a lot more power and workers did not. And I don't think anyone who's a worker in this country wants to go back to those days where they don't have the protections or the say in their workplace. But if that, the fact that that's a priority during a COVID package where we should be talking about testing and contact tracing and mask wearing and doing things to get rid of the disease, it's really pretty outrageous. But again, Mitch McConnell, I've grown to accept that. Yeah, remarkable stuff. Okay, well, let's pick up some phone calls here. David in Columbus, Ohio, listening on WGRN. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, Congressman. I wanted to ask why the Democratic Party still supports these gigantic defense budgets. I do my best to lobby my own congressperson, but I feel like I'm a voice in the wilderness here. What's your opinion?
Yeah, David, my opinion is it's not so much about the Democratic Party supporting something. It's about individual members. The defense industrial complex has been very smart in that they have defense contractors in every single state and likely in every single district in the country. And a lot of money goes to jobs in everyone's district. And generally, you do things that support the people in your district. And when you have defense contractors in your ear with their workers who are your constituents, it's harder to stand up to it. I do think, though, their excesses have gone too far. We've increased defense spending 20% in just the last 4 years at a time of relative peace. We've got all sorts of reasons why we don't need more nukes and why we don't need a space force and why we don't need more private contractors. And Barbara Lee and I announced this week, actually, we're forming Congressional Defense Spending Reduction Caucus. Again, next year, we got 93 votes to cut the budget 10%. In Tom, that's actually a really significant thing because just 3 years ago, Barbara Lee had a 1% cut to defense, and we got 73 votes. This year, we had a 10% cut, and we got 93 votes. And we're moving the right direction, and the sequester now is delinked in the next year, so we don't have to have defense and non-defense discretionary spending tied together. So we are going to spend the next year making the case about the abuse, the fraud, the waste that happens in defense spending. I mean, just one great example, Tom, if I can, the Ford-class aircraft carrier has a significant design flaw in that when toilets get backed up, you have to use $400,000 worth of a special acid to unclog them. So you literally are flushing money down the drain on the aircraft carrier. And that's just like one little example. Every single major defense contractor has been charged with fraud. And yet they've gotten $1 trillion worth of contracts. So there's a lot that I think if the American people knew, we can keep moving members of Congress. But to David's question, I think the problem is, I have one company in my district And unfortunately, I'm going to talk about this a lot in the next year, Tom, because I'm pretty passionate about, lowering our defense budget. They make a product that's about as big as my pinky. Every year, they come by and want us to purchase more submarines than the department asks for, because they make a little part that goes in it. Multiply that across the country, and you can tell why it's difficult to get defense spending under control.
I think in around the year 2000 or in the late 90s, our defense budget was in the neighborhood of $300 billion a year. Now we're pushing $700 billion a year. I don't think most Americans realize how much it's exploded. Yeah, how much it's exploded it's more than doubled, or more, in the neighborhood of doubled in 20 years. That's and I don't see what the threat, obviously 9/11, oh my God, we've got to do something. But, where's the big threat?
Well, and it's 90 times the budget of the Center for Disease Control. And right now, if you ask anyone what's the biggest threat to the country, they're not going to name a country or a political ideology. They're going to name the COVID virus, right? And yet we spend so little on things that actually help people. We could be putting money into housing and healthcare, into environment. I mean, there's so many other priorities people have. And yet, when you look at what we spend on these items, too, it's just unbelievable, the profits that are had by these contractors. And that's where the money's really going. We even said, don't go after military personnel, go after the private contractors and go after the defense contractors and go after the waste and fraud that's out there, because there's plenty.
Congressman, we just have 30 seconds before the break. Have you guys thought about, reinventing William Proxmire and his Golden Fleece Award, or, repeating some of the commissions that in the past looked into fraud, waste, and abuse in the Pentagon?
Yeah, you're right on to where we're thinking, Tom. What we want to start doing, I haven't seen it lately, a lot of the abuses that are out there, we just have to start publicizing that. We want to do that on a weekly basis over the next year to make the case even stronger to the public.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. Congressman Mark Pocan, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the big cheese progressive in Washington, D.C., from Wisconsin, of course. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. It is the Thom Hartmann Program. This is Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And Congressman Pocan hails from the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Nancy in Woodland, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi. I'm just wondering, I don't think Congress should vote to fund the Homeland Security Department based on what they're doing in Portland. And so I'm wondering if they did, or if you think they will vote to fund them, why?
Yeah, Nancy, actually, it was announced yesterday, the Progressive Caucus was pushing not to have a vote on it. And if I can, Tom, and I'll do this concisely, but, last week, a former Bernie low-level staffer put out a committee vote without knowing the context, and got an uproar from some people thinking that Barbara Lee and I are suddenly corporate sellouts or sellouts for the Department of Homeland Security. And you can't explain that in 280 characters. And a couple people said, I hope he says something in Hartman. So what we've been saying all along is on that committee vote that reduced the number of ICE beds, it guaranteed no funds for a wall, it stopped the transfer authority, that was better than current law, and that we voted for so that it would be the position of the Democrats going into any conference committee, but we didn't want to vote on it for the full Congress because we don't support the funding levels on it. And as a Progressive Caucus, we pushed against it. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus wanted to support it on the floor. We ultimately won. It was announced yesterday they're not going to put that bill on the floor because we don't want to, especially not just Portland, but with ICE and what you're talking about, kids in cages, all the rest, we don't want to give that funding. But it is frustrating when, people on Twitter put out something they don't understand, and then people, rather than looking at 30 years of a voting history, they decide to follow someone they don't even know who puts something out there, and I waste a little too much time in responding, which I'm not going to do, hopefully, in the future. No, we did fight to make sure it didn't come up. It didn't come up. We were told yesterday. They announced it officially, and that won't come up for a vote in the floor of Congress. So I think a big win on behalf of the Progressive Caucus.
Yeah, and with regard to Twitter, I just have to tell you, I'm seeing a mind-boggling number of bots and trolls that I don't think are coming out of the United States, and I've just stopped engaging with them. I don't feed trolls. But anyway.
Yeah, I've started something I didn't want to do, Tom, but I've started blocking people, whether they're from left, right, anywhere. Especially, like I said, I can't tell you how many people, Tom, in the last week, and these were not trolls, who said to me, I can't believe you voted against the 10% cut in defense. And then I had to say, well, wait a minute. That was actually my amendment. I voted for my amendment to cut defense spending. But they would look at the Senate voting list and not see your name voting for it and then attack, rather than say, oh, that's right, they're in a different house and a different body. So I just would hope that people, I expect it from Trump, folks to mindlessly drink the Kool-Aid and follow Donald Trump. I do hope that folks, who are progressive, think a little broader as they look at something. If something doesn't look right, I guarantee Barbara Lee is not a sellout for the defense industrial complex, right? Her entire career shows that. Yeah. And yet I watched a lot of comments around that. And I just want us to, perhaps take that pause before we go on the attack when, we see a tweet from someone we don't even know.
Well, in about 20 seconds, unless I have to read a live read afterwards, in which case it'll be a minute and 20 seconds, we're going to rejoin SiriusXM and our commercial stations, and I'll ask you about that so that you can make that point again, because I want to get it to the widest audience possible. Okay. We'll be right back. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Middays with Mark. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's your media support group for We the People, the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We have a special video up over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program, and it's about how a letter that the IRS sent out to 3.9 million Americans saved 700 lives. And you're like, wait a minute, the IRS saved 700 lives? How did that happen? Well, it had to do with Obamacare, and it's a fascinating story. And it turns out that this analysis of this IRS mailing was actually the first time that the federal government has done a study that actually proved that people having access to health care produces fewer deaths. For every 1,648 people who got the letter, there was one fewer premature death. I'll explain the whole thing in the video. It's as I said, it's available over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and it is really worth checking out. And it's a great ad, essentially, for a national health care system. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls 21 minutes past the hour. Congressman Pocan, there was a dust-up on Twitter over the last couple of days about something about you and Barbara Lee in a defense appropriation bill, and apparently a whole bunch of people either took it wrong or somebody tried to twist it wrong in order to, basically stick the knife in you. What's going on?
Yeah, so, I think, this is at the 30,000-foot level. I just make an appeal to folks. We're not like the MAGA Kool-Aid drinkers who just believe whatever Donald Trump says. We think for ourselves. And sometimes if someone puts something out there that doesn't seem right just do a little research before you go on the attack, because there was someone who, a former staffer of a presidential campaign, a lower-level staffer, put out a vote of a committee vote, and they thought that Barbara Lee and I were voting for ICE to expand ICE funding. And the reality is we've been, as a CPC, fighting to make sure that vote didn't come to the floor. In fact, we won yesterday. We found out that they're not taking Homeland Security budget, the appropriations bill, to the floor of Congress, which is what we want to do. But you need to have a position to debate, or I'm sorry, not to debate, but to negotiate when you have conference committee for the final appropriation bill. The bill in committee it lowered significantly the number of beds that ICE has. It didn't allow any funds for the wall. It stopped any transfer authority of funds. It did a bunch of things that were better than current law, and we needed that as a bargaining position. So we all in committee, you vote for that, as we're arguing not to have it come up to the floor because we don't support the funding levels going to Homeland Security and to ICE. But no one really asked that when they put it out there. I tried to reply. Often people don't want to admit they're wrong then at that point. And then I had people throughout the week telling me that I voted against the cut to 10% for defense, and why did I do that? And I had to inform them, no, actually, I'm the author of that, and I did support my own amendment. So I just ask people to pause. If you see something that seems out of whack, Ro Khanna voted for the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization, in his Armed Services Committee to let out a much better bill than what current law was, and then voted against it on the floor. That often happens in Congress for negotiating positions for future negotiations with the Senate. But take a second to ask rather than attack, because I've now I'm starting to block people who don't read or think. I don't care what political ideology on my political page anyway on Twitter, because it's a toxic environment, and we don't need to be as toxic as Donald Trump's folks. So just, I hope that helps. And we won. We had a big win. We are not voting on the full floor of Congress for those levels of funding, given Portland, given what they do with kids in cages and all the rest. And that was our goal, and we accomplished it as of yesterday.
Yeah, sadly, the algorithms that Twitter and Facebook use promote fights, basically. They promote anything that's hot and inflammatory. And, very often that's stuff that's just complete BS, which is so unfortunate. So back to our calls here. Don in Chenango Bridge, New York. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. And we've got about, 2 minutes to the break.
Okay, I have a short question. I was just wondering, currently we have like 100-foot bubble around the voting places, and I was wondering if that could be increased due to the physical distancing requirements.
Don, first of all, I do think it varies locality to locality and state to state. So that may be what it is in your area. But we're going to have to do all of that with the election, which is why many of us are trying to do vote by mail, or at minimum, and I do mean minimum, absentee ballot requests, so people don't have to go vote on Election Day. I was talking to the governor in Wisconsin's office just in the last 24 hours about this, and we're trying to get supplies so we can have poll workers work safely right now, and we're having some supply issues. And it's going to be tough to run this election safely, so we really do need people to think ahead and request an absentee ballot where they can, and get that ballot so they don't have to wait and take any risk that we might have by Election Day.
Lynn in Chicago. Real quick one, Lynn. We got about a minute to the break.
Hi, I'm a guardian of an adult with autism in Illinois, and he gets Social Security. He works a little bit, and so I call in his income every month. I get 4 pages because I'm the guardian every month. He gets 4 pages in the mail, both enveloped up, printed back and forth, 8 pages total, for $1 change in his Social Security payment. How do we get Social Security less dependent on paper?
Good question.
Lynn, I hear you. I'm dealing with my mother right now, who's 91 in an assisted living facility. And because she got an increase in Social Security, it almost threw off all the other assistance, and she's on Medicaid because she's not a wealthy woman. And I'll tell you, going through that paperwork is incredibly frustrating. Hopefully when we have the House, Senate, and President, we can do something about it. But I absolutely hear what you're saying, and you're right. I mean, we shouldn't, for such small little things, we can create hours of work on behalf of government employees and the people affected. So let me pass on the I'm sorry on behalf of the federal government for what you're going through.
Yeah, at the same time, we don't want to toss this to Mitt Romney and the Republicans who seem to want to cut Social Security.
Well, exactly. And, but I do think there's a way for what she's bringing up. And like my mother, we just spent really 2 or 3 months to untangle them giving a payment that put $1 more in her account than she can have to qualify for Medicaid. There is a lot of things we could do to improve.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Congressman Pocan is the co-chair, along with Pramila Jayapal, of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He's taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark.
We're reading today from a book by David Sanger, the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times national security reporter. The title of the book is The Perfect Weapon: War, Sabotage, and Fear in the Cyber Age. We're reading from the preface. A year into Donald J. Trump's presidency, his defense secretary, Jim Mattis, sent the new commander-in-chief a startling recommendation. With nations around the world threatening to use cyber weapons to bring down America's power grids, cell phone networks, and water supplies, Trump should declare that he's ready to take extraordinary steps to protect the country. If any nation hit America's critical infrastructure with a devastating strike, even a non-nuclear one, it should be forewarned that the United States might reach for a nuclear weapon in response. Like most things in Washington, the recommendation leaked immediately. Excuse me. Many declared it a crazy idea and wild overkill. While nations had turned their cyber weapons against each other dozens of times in recent years, no attack had yet proven to cost a human life, at least directly. Not the American attacks on Iran's and North Korea's weapon programs, not the North Korean attacks on American banks, a famed Hollywood studio, and the British healthcare system, not the Russian attacks in Ukraine, Europe, and then at the core of American democracy. That streak of luck was certain to end soon, but why should Donald Trump or any of his successors take the huge risk of escalating a cyber war by going nuclear? The Pentagon's recommendation, it turned out, was the prelude to other proposals delivered to a president who values toughness and America first to use the nation's powerful cyber weapons far more aggressively. But it was also a reminder of how quickly the fear of devastating cyber attacks has moved from the stuff of science fiction and die-hard movies to the center of American defense strategy. Just over a decade before, in 2007, cyber attacks were missing entirely from the global threat assessment that intelligence agencies prepare each year for Congress. Terrorism topped that list, along with other post-9/11 concerns. Now that hierarchy has been reversed. For several years, a variety of cyber threats, ranging from a paralyzing strike on the nation's cities to a sophisticated effort to undercut public confidence in its institutions, has appeared as the nation's #1 threat on the list. Not since the Soviets tested the bomb in 1949 had the perception of threats facing the nation been revised so quickly. Yet Mattis, who had risen to 4-star status in a career focused in the Middle East, feared that the 2 decades spent chasing al-Qaeda and ISIS around the globe had distracted America from its most potent challenges. Great power competition, not terrorism, is now the primary focus of U.S. national security, he said in early 2018. America's, quote, competitive edge has eroded in every domain of warfare, including the newest one, cyberspace. The nuclear strategy he handed Trump gave voice to an inchoate fear among many in the Pentagon that cyber attacks posed a threat unlike any other, one that we had completely failed to deter. The irony is that the United States remains the world's stealthiest, most skillful cyber power, as the Iranians discovered when their centrifuges spun out of control, and the North Koreans suspected as their missiles fell out of the sky. But the gap is closing. Cyber weapons are so cheap to develop and so easy to hide that they've proven irresistible. And American officials are discovering that in a world in which almost everything is connected, phones, cars, electrical grids, and satellites, everything can be disrupted, if not destroyed. For several years, the thinking inside the Pentagon was that only nations with nuclear weapons could threaten America's existence. Now that assumption is in doubt. In almost every classified Pentagon scenario, for how a future confrontation with Russia and China, or even Iran and North Korea, might play out. The adversary's first strike against the United States would include a cyber barrage aimed at civilians. It would fry power grids, stop trains, silence cell phones, and overwhelm the internet. In the worst-case scenarios, food and water would begin to run out. Hospitals would turn people away. Separated from their electronics and thus their connections, Americans would panic and turn against one another. The Pentagon is now planning for this scenario because it knows many of its own war plans open with similarly paralyzing cyber attacks against our adversaries, reflecting new strategies to try to win wars before a shot is fired. Glimpses of what this would look like have leaked out in recent years, thanks partly to Edward J. Snowden, partly because of a mysterious group called the Shadow Brokers, suspected of close links to Russian intelligence, obtained terabytes of data containing many of the tools that the National Security Agency used to breach foreign computer networks. It didn't take long for some of those stolen cyber weapons to be shot back at America and its allies in attacks whose bizarre-sounding names, like WannaCry, suddenly appeared in the headlines every week. Yet the secrecy surrounding these programs obscures most public debate about the wisdom of using them or the risks inherent in losing control of them. The government's silence about America's new arsenal and its implications poses a sharp contrast to the first decades of the nuclear era. The horrific scenes of destruction at Hiroshima and Nagasaki not only seared the national psyche, but made America's destructive capabilities, and soon Russia's and China's, obvious and undeniable. Yet even while the government kept the details classified, how to build atomic weapons, where they are stored, and who has the authority to order their launch, America engaged in a decades-long political debate about when to threaten to use the bomb and whether to ban it. The book, The Perfect Weapon by David E. Sanger.
In this week's Science Revolution, concerning news that we may have hit a tipping point for methane in the Arctic. Professor Richard Wolff drops by to discuss a pandemic tax to help fund the COVID-19 recovery for the common good. Kevin Camps of Beyond Nuclear visits to connect the FBI raids of the Ohio House Speaker to the billion-dollar bailout of two very dangerous, age-degraded nuclear power plants. And in Geeky Science, there's a new study out about how sitting confuses your body's fat or fit system. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. It's Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Michael in Ontario, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. How are you?
Hey, good, Michael. Thank you.
Hi, great. I wanted to ask you a question. That question is, if law enforcement knew that they faced loss of union protection, seizure of all assets, and their defense remanded to the public defender's pool with a federal trial heard by jurors from their victims' community, where a guilty conviction equaled serving a 30 years to life prison sentence without the possibility of parole, do you think excessive force crime as we know it would all but cease to exist? And if so, if I were to email you the platform proposal for such an act, would you strongly consider authoring it and presenting it before Congress? It's a viable accountability measure, and I could send that email today.
Yeah, Michael, we already have passed a bill in the House that I think does, quite honestly, significantly more than that to help address it, creating the database of police officers who offend, taking away the immunity that they currently have. It does a lot of very serious reforms because it's more than just that one thing you bring up that needs to happen. And I'm hoping, but not counting on Mitch McConnell to take up something in this area that would actually get across the finish line. If not, we're going to have to do it once we have the Senate and the president come November, or actually come January when they actually take office. But I think the package that went through the House was much more comprehensive and will really do an awful lot to try to curb a lot of the current problems.
Adam in New Orleans, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Tom. I see defunding of the U.S. Postal Service as intrinsically tied to voter suppression, and your comment earlier suggests the same. Is funding for the U.S. Postal Service as part of the COVID stimulus, is this negotiable from the Democratic perspective? I'd argue it shouldn't be.
Yeah, so we had $25 billion requested plus some additional funds for the USPS in the HEROES Act that we passed 2.5 months ago. We also would like to do vote-by-mail provisions. I think the vote-by-mail may be a non-starter with the Senate Republicans, but certainly support for the post office shouldn't be. So I know we're going to have a letter coming out a little later today from the Progressive Caucus with our priorities, and within our top 10 priorities is funding for the Postal Service. We really want that to stay. And, it's silly we're having this fight. We're having this fight because under George W. Bush, there was a provision that makes the Postal Service have to prepay benefits 75 years into the future. No other business or government agency has to do that. And that's largely why they've had some financial issues. We've got to get rid of that. We're not going to do that with Mitch McConnell. But part of it is voter suppression. Part of it is privatization. Don't forget, they would just as soon have a private enterprise take over what the Postal Service does. And yet in the Constitution, it's one of the few federal agencies that's actually mentioned in the Constitution. So we have to do everything we can to protect it.
Larry in Buffalo Grove, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you for taking my call, Congressman and Tom. I'm a longtime listener. I just wanted to be sure that even if you can't get specific funding for vote by mail or absentee voting, are you going to be able to include any funding for election security generally in the current COVID bill that's under consideration?
Yeah, Larry. So we had it again in the HEROES Act. I have to go back and think 2.5 months ago what we did. We've been waiting for the Senate Republicans to decide there's a problem going on in this country. And I think that might be one that could move forward because, we have to do something different about how elections are done. And I think now that a lot of red states are seeing these huge spikes in COVID, I think that may make senators more willing to do some right decisions. As we know, Republicans often have to be personally affected by something to actually deal with it. So I think there's, some good chances that could be continued into the bill.
Don in St. Charles, Missouri. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, Congressman.
Hey, Don.
Recently, I heard one of the Democratic department heads giving a little speech, and she started out by saying, I know government has failed the American people. Why are Democrats taking ownership of failed Republican policies? No one should ever say. Why don't they simply say Republican policies have failed the American people and we are working to solve them? And then secondly, every time you guys are on TV, on the radio, or simply making a speech before Congress, you need to say we will protect Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the post office. So tell me why you guys aren't being a little more selective in your speech. And I thank you so much for your hard work, Mark. Have a good day.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Don. And I'm not sure who the Democratic department head is. I'm not sure what that position is, but I have heard people say pretty rarely, but what you're bringing up, and I agree with you, it's defeatist language. It's not correct. I mean, I don't think anyone's failed by Social Security or Medicare. In fact, those are quite popular programs. I don't think anyone's failed by the Postal Service. So you're absolutely right in your sentiment. I just think I'm not seeing it that those things come out of people, at least that I've seen from the floor of Congress or from members of Congress. So I can't speak to the person who said it. And quite honestly, we do say it. In fact, John Larson from Connecticut has a bill that has a majority of the Democrats on it. In fact, I think he's got 200 people on it that actually want to expand Social Security. So many of us are on record saying that. So I think we're in the right place, Don. I can't speak to the person that you heard say that, but I agree with you. Talking from their talking points isn't necessarily a good thing, especially when it's not accurate.
Mario in Berwyn, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Sure. Thank you kindly taking my call, sir. It's an honor to talk to you, gentlemen. I just walking home right now, and my mail was two literatures. Ms. Pelosi asking for money. I'm more than glad to send this woman, send her whatever I can afford. I love to see her when she speaks poetry with her hands, and when you're looking at her, how eloquent she is. I'm willing to send money to her as much as I can. My question is, if this is for real, we have the chief and the fraud and the White House, and I don't take a pass. Everything can be a fraud. So I just want to be sure that I'm going to send the money to her. That is one. And the second is I received both my bail over here in Illinois, and I'm very glad to do that. But the most important thing, I will try to make and send the most money to Ms. Pelosi. Thank you for taking my call. Mr. Tom, it's an honor to talk to you. I met you at Darien, Illinois. Thank you. I taken my call out of the air.
Thank you, Mario. Nice to hear from you.
Great. Well, thank you, Mario. And, I think if I can take your point and even bring it to 30,000 foot, Mario, everyone needs to get involved in every possible way in the next less than 100 days. Bernie Sanders, I saw, said something today that I really took to heart, which is this may be the most important 100 days or one of the most important 100 days in our history of our country. With what Donald Trump is doing to it, I haven't seen another president in my lifetime do. And we need to stop this, and we need to restore our place in the globe. We need to stop having people die because we're going to be proudly ignorant of science. We need to change the course. And I think whatever people can do to help, whether it be volunteering, talking to their friends, using social media positively, helping, when you get a mailing, anything you can do, Mario, and others, it's going to be important. This is a real important next less than 100 days.
Congressman,
coming.
Forgive the interruption, but we only have 45 seconds till we hit a break. But
Sure.
I think what he's speaking to is there's reporting this morning from Brandon Fisher over at American Bridge that the Trump family has taken $250 million, $250 million.
Yeah.
And much of it is coming through these phony charities. I get 4 or 5 of these solicitations a day, and some of them have, one of Donald Trump's daughters-in-law, as their spokespersons. Yeah. And they're just scams. How does somebody know? It seems like the answer would be know who the organization is. If you get a fundraising mailing that says give money to Nancy Pelosi because you're a registered Democrat, and it's got the name of a group on it that is, a right-wing group, be careful. Good point. Right?
Yeah, I generally say support candidates and their committees, and then things like the Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee over Save the Earth or a group that no one's heard of, because you don't know where that money's going. But I also think that Donald Trump is especially good at profitizing off his own campaign.
Yeah, and it's making Democrats concerned. It's amazing. Yeah. Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour with Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. More right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Congressman Pocan's website is pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Let's see here. Jeff in Portland, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, guys. Tom and Congressman Pocan. Thanks for the always great town hall. Congressman Pocan, before I get to my question really quick, I just want to give a shout out to your Progressive Caucus co-chair, Congressman Congresswoman Jayapal for her scathing takedown of Bill Barr's right-wing authoritarian impulses yesterday. And I think it's a shame that neither she nor Barbara Lee have been given much consideration for Biden's VP choice, as far as we know. But to my question, Congressman, Senator Schumer was on MSNBC last night saying he believes you guys have good leverage, and I agree. I think Trump desperately wants to put his name on another round of one-time $1,200 direct payments. But in my opinion, Congressman, that's where you guys should one-up him and push for monthly direct payments, preferably of $2,000 to everyone, because A, you can say to the American people, Trump wanted to give you chump change, and we fought to get you these sustainable monthly checks. And B, we know direct payments to people in need are highly stimulative to the economy. So when we, the Democrats, win in November, we won't be inheriting a completely catastrophic economy. What do you think, Congressman Pocan?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Chef, on both fronts. First of all, Pramila Jayapal, I think, did an amazing job, as she always does. I'm very proud to be co-chair of the Progressive Caucus with her. Unfortunately, she was not born in the United States. I think she would have some succession issues. Barbara Lee, on the other hand, has been mentioned. I know John Nichols, our friend from the nation, has put that idea out there, and I think she would be an amazing vice president. Both of them would be. I just think one can actually qualify to be. And you're right. A $1,200 check, quite honestly, is nothing more than Donald Trump trying to buy a vote. He's going to send a letter out again, which was ridiculous, waste of money. When we have proposed originally monthly regular payments, that's what the Progressive Caucus proposed. I don't think the Republicans are going to go for that. I think my priority going right now is to make sure that anyone who's been hurt, you've lost your job at no fault of their own, your demand for your business is not there through no fault of your own. Those are the folks we got to make whole, because that's where the jobs are. And I think, on unemployment, keeping that extra money up so that people can pay their rent and continue to survive during this pandemic is really, really important. And a one-time $1,200 check that Donald Trump's just going to try to use politically probably isn't as valuable as helping people who need it the most. And I really hope we keep that focus, because it looks like the fight is over how much money we're going to spend. We had a $3 trillion bill. The Republicans don't want to spend more than $1 trillion. You can't do everything with less money, so we're going to have to really prioritize. But thank you for your comments, Jeff.
Congressman, we just have 30 seconds. How do you expect this to play out, and on what timeline?
I'm hoping next week, possibly the following week, but I'm hoping next week. I would be surprised if they got to an agreement to vote on something this week. But I'm thinking next week, hopefully. I think they actually want to get past July, the end of July, so they can argue people should be working and all this other BS that they like to argue, and it's not based on facts, and then they'll get the job done. But in the meantime, they're hurting a lot of people. They're hurting small business owners. They're hurting a lot of people in the community.
Yeah, amen. We'll be right back. Congressman Mark Pocan is taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with the hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Peter in Lawton, Oklahoma. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Peter? Okay, Peter's listening to his TV or YouTube or whatever it may be. Mike in St. Louis, Missouri. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thanks for taking my call. Tom, you're a Medicare beneficiary, as am I, and many of your listeners are either on Medicare or the rest of them are going to be on Medicare, but they're not if this Medicare Advantage program continues. It's a frickin' Trojan horse that's slowly bleeding Medicare. Tom and the Congressman, what do you say about this?
Yeah, Mike, I do think we need to do more to look at the various plans that are out there. My 91-year-old mother signed up for one of these, and while she thinks it's helping her pay for her drugs, we have a program in Wisconsin called Senior Care that's helped seniors for a number of years pay for their drugs, but she also can't get some services that she should have gotten just directly through Medicare had she not signed up for the supplemental. And I think we have to really make sure that we're watching these plans and making sure that they're not ripping people off in a way that that defies consumer law, and I think many do. And this is something that, should we be able to get the majority, hopefully we can have some time to have hearings. Right now, as you know, we're just kind of swamped by COVID and by the swampiness of the Trump administration. But you bring up a very good point, and like I said, I'm seeing it personally from something that my mom signed up for, but I don't know if she really knew exactly what she had signed up for.
Justin in Los Angeles, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, fellas, I'm wondering about the student loan provisions. There was nothing in the Republican bill, so I wanted to see what the Democrats were thinking about countering with in their bill.
Yeah, Justin, there is something in the HEROES Act, but as I mentioned, we passed it 10 weeks ago. I don't remember the exact provisions around that, but I'm sure if you Googled those two things together, HEROES Act and student loans, you'd probably find exactly what was in there. But I know that was addressed, and hopefully that's something that, as they negotiate between the two bills, will move forward.
Brooks in Phoenix, Arizona, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, good morning, guys. I was interested in the call about why it is so difficult for Democrats to vote against defense bills because of the jobs associated with all those contractors. And I am an ex-Boeing engineer myself who has been laid off by Boeing. And my thought about it is, rather than building weapons, if we were to repurpose a company like Boeing with the talent that they have to do something like build the best rail system connected with the best light rail that would be the envy of the world, we would be able to do this rather than building weapons. And I think that would go a lot easier with Democrats.
Yeah, Brooks, two things. One, you're right. I think the difficulty is, from working for a company like that, they don't want to change over what they're doing because there's a cost, and they just want to keep doing what they're doing, even if it's an obsolete weapon system. So, there is that challenge. But secondly, you're onto something else that a lot of us have started talking about. It's not just that we want to cut defense spending. It's really the type of defense spending. There's an argument that you could repurpose defense dollars for other things, because the definition of defense really should include COVID-19. We should be able to use defense dollars to defend the American people against a disease. We should be able to use it in a number of other areas. And I think that's another idea worthy of putting forward, because if we can take some of the current dollars, I would argue investment in CDC provides more defense for this country right now than another aircraft carrier or a few more F-35s. And I think that's part of a future debate we're going to have.
Jack in Folsom, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you. Actually, I'm calling about Social Security, but I just want to point out, remember, Eisenhower gave us the interstate highway system based on the defense rationale. So that's a very good point, I think. But Social Security, and I'm not trying to complain or accuse. I just want to understand. As you mentioned, Representative Larson has a Save Social Security bill without cutting Social Security. Save it without cutting. He introduced that more than, I think, a year and a half ago. Why can't the House, the Democratic House, pass that? Why is that such a heavy lift for the Democratic House?
Yeah, I agree with you, Jack. It's all a magic number, right? We need 218 votes, and I think John, I believe, and I hope I'm not saying this wrong, but I think he has over 200 sponsors. But I don't think he's at the point he has 218 votes yet. And, part of it is you don't want something to go on the floor and to go down, so you keep trying to get the votes. And now, honestly, because we're not able to function quite as we would have liked to for the last 5 or 6 months. A lot less legislation is moving forward. We're doing the must-pass stuff like appropriations, but some of those have taken a back seat. But I'm with you. John has been in my office a number of times. We're strategizing on how to make sure that we can prove there's 218 votes to move it forward. We're just honestly not there yet. I'm a little surprised that we would have some Democrats who may not be supportive on it. But, it's something that we have to do from the grassroots to convince those members that their constituents want and need this.
Is there a list anywhere of the Democrats who are not supporting that bill that we could lobby?
Yeah, I mean, you take the list of Democrats and just subtract out the sponsors of John's bill, and it's probably, again, I'm forgetting the numbers offhand, Tom, but I'd say about 30 or so people, and those are the folks that we got to work on.
Yeah, remarkable. We have about 20 seconds left in the hour, Congressman. What should we be looking for this week, this next 7 days?
Yeah, really, the negotiations, on the COVID bill are going to be a priority. So if you start seeing us talk about things we have to defend, especially the extra money for unemployment, I think that's the number one priority I have going into the negotiations. Help us amplify that by reaching out to your member of Congress and demanding it.
Great. And the number for the Congressional Switchboard is 202-224-3121. Congressman, thank you again for dropping by this week. It's so great having you with us.
Of course. Thank you, Tom, as always.
Great talking with you. We'll be back. We're going to get into Jacob Soboroff, actually, is going to be with us. And we're going to talk about what the Trump administration is doing with children.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmerman and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimring and Hawkins's results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, new research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest, end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates, end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. A slave is as good as gold, Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. Sources for Finance. In Defense of Public Service by Cedric Alexander.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
When Donald Trump announced that he was running for president back in 2015, he basically announced that he was going to run on a platform of racism largely directed, at least immediately over the short term, toward Hispanic people, toward people from south of our border, and has reiterated that over and over and over again. And fairly early on in his administration, started putting policies and practices into place that, executed exactly that vision. I think one of the absolute finest reporters in the business in America at any network right now is Jacob Soboroff, and he has been all over this issue. He has a new book out that summarizes and just brilliantly lays out the stories, the reality, the horror of everything that has happened in this regard. It's titled Separated, Inside an American Tragedy. I have just started reading it. I apologize that I haven't had the time to read the entire book, but I'm working on it. And Jacob Soboroff is on the line with us right now, correspondent with NBC and MSNBC. JacobSoboroff.com is his website. You can tweet him at Jacob Soboroff, Soboroff. Jacob, welcome to the program. Tell us what led you into this issue.
Tom, it's so good to be with you. Thank you, first of all, so much for having me. Look, the reason I wanted to do this book is because, so many of us remember 2 summers ago exactly what happened. The Trump administration systematically separated what today doctors, the American Academy of Pediatrics calls abuse, Physicians for Human Rights, the Nobel Peace Prize winning organization, calls torture. The Trump administration systematically tortured and abused, in the words of those experts, over 5,500 children, taking them away from their parents in an unprecedented systematic campaign to separate parents and children at the southwest border for the sole purpose of scaring people away from coming into this country. And I saw that family separation policy with my own eyes. And the reality is, as you alluded to, I'd been covering border issues, not just for NBC and MSNBC for a long time, but even before I started working here. And while I was there and I saw it myself, I walked into that former Walmart, 250,000 square feet, 1,500 boys, 10 to 17 detained there, hundreds of them separated, allowed outside 2 or 3 hours a day only. And then inside the processing station in McAllen, Texas, where kids were in cages, laying on floors under Mylar blankets, supervised by security contractors in a watchtower. I have an admission to make, which is that I honestly didn't see it, shamefully, coming. And so this book is my exploration of why, how this could have happened, how this could happen in the United States of America. It's why the book's called Separated Inside an American Tragedy, because that's exactly what this is, what this was, and what it continues to be, honestly. And so, I had a lot of learning to do myself, and I wanted to be transparent about that and put that down on paper in this book.
Joseph Stalin famously said, when one person dies, it's a tragedy. When 1 million people die, it's a statistic. And so much of this has been presented in the context of statistics. This many 100 kids here, this many 1,000 kids there, this sort of thing. I remember the first time I saw you reporting on this on MSNBC, it transported me back to my own childhood. I was never separated from my parents, but I tried to imagine what I would feel like when I was 6, 7, 8, 10 years old if somebody had torn me away from my mom and dad, particularly for years. If somebody had put me in a cage, and now it's going on years in some cases. If somebody had basically sold me into the foster care system, or I think, what if somebody had taken away? I have 3 children. What if somebody had taken away one of my children? How would I feel about that? And when you personalize this, when you imagine this, it becomes so unbelievably horrible. How you saw these kids? How were they responding to being torn away from their parents?
You know, and the other, Tom, you make a really good point, which is that we all actually reacted that way 2 summers ago. And, if, you know, part of the reason that, again, I want to do this and put all this new information about what happened in there is because 2 years ago feels like 2 decades ago almost, with so much that has gone on over the course of this administration. And to answer your question, one official who was directly involved in the reunification of these children not only told me was it the greatest humanitarian crisis of his lifetime, referring to domestic U.S. politics and what it did to these children, but that clinically speaking, childhood trauma leads to a century of suffering for kids that go through something like this. And I guess, I mean, there's one specific anecdote I think that I would love to share with you, which is a couple weeks ago, maybe it was a month ago at this point, I was down in Yuma, Arizona, covering President Trump's visit to see his border wall. And Juan, the father who I write about in the book, sent me a text. He was separated from his son, Jose, for almost 5 months. And were it not for a fantastic immigration lawyer, Lindsay Kozlowski at the Immigrant Defenders Law Center here in L.A., who got them back together, they could have been permanently separated. There were 400 parents who were deported without their children, and still yet we don't know where all the parents and children who were separated are. And the reason I bring that up is that Juan said to me, if you see President Trump asking something for me, why is it that you separated us and left us with this psychological trauma? And that's exactly what it is. It is a lifetime, it's almost incomprehensible, a lifetime of psychological trauma that has been perpetrated upon these children by the administration for not only for no reason other than to scare people from coming away, but despite, and this is what I write about in the book, I didn't know about at the time, the best efforts of so many career civil servants who did care about the best interests of the children, who warned time and again, whether it was within Homeland Security, within Health and Human Services, that this was going to do this to these children. And yet the politicals, led by Stephen Miller, moved forward and went ahead with this nevertheless, and here we are today.
Jacob, we've got about 2 minutes, so we're going to hit a hard break here. I'm curious, who in the administration was most directly responsible for this? Who is maintaining it? And what can average Americans do to try to change this?
Sure. Well, Stephen Miller is the easy one to finger for this. But one thing I learned, and I write about extensively in the book, is that there were these key inflection points where these warnings were put forward by these career officials. And one instance I'd like to tell you about before we have to go is that Scott Lloyd, the man who had custodial custody over these children for the federal government within the Office of Refugee Resettlement, when the list leaked to the New York Times in April of 2018 that they were holding 700 separated children in the Homeland Security Department's custody, his first instinct was not to go rescue the children, tell the administration this wasn't what they should be doing, but it was to get rid of the list. And there are stories like that throughout the book.
Where is this guy now?
Scott Lloyd is no longer within the administration, but he was moved from HHS to another position within the administration. But he's still there. Kirstjen Nielsen was warned this would violate the constitutional rights as the Secretary of Homeland Security of the migrants coming to the country. You know, there have been virtually no consequences for the people responsible for this policy. And I think that's important for all of us to remember.
Yeah. Is there, we have 30 seconds, is there any effort in Congress or anywhere else to hold some of these folks responsible? Or Trump and Miller, for that matter?
You still hear congressional committees like House Judiciary consistently following up on this, trying to bring people before the Congress. But the reality is, and it was a stark thing to learn for me, no. The answer is no right now. I mean, I get questions all the time on my social media. Why aren't people hauled before the Hague? I mean, these are questions that I, as a reporter, cannot answer. It's for our elected officials to do so, and now is the time for them to do that.
Yeah, amen. The book is Separated, Inside an American Tragedy. The author, Jacob Soboroff, one of the finest reporters working in America today and doing just spectacular work. If you don't have this book, get it. In fact, get an extra copy and share it with somebody else. Jacob, thank you so much for dropping by today.
I appreciate you, Tom.
Great talking with you. We'll be back. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the insane inhumanity of this administration is mind-boggling. And welcome back. Jared in Downington, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's on your mind today?
My father got 106 fever Saturday, and we had to rush him to the hospital. And he came back, and the doctor said he may have had coronavirus. So we had a test done, and we just recently got the test results back, and it came up negative, thankfully. But it completely ruined our lives. Like, we had to call off work. I had to call off work, and I had to tell them, look, I couldn't work. Thankfully, I'm getting paid for the days I didn't work, and I can finally go back now. But we were really scared in that situation here. And I think people are really starting to seem to forget, like, the normalization of the coronavirus is becoming very disturbing for me. And the fact that this is not, like, I don't see Democrats really pushing that this is the Trump Republican virus. And, you know,
Nancy Pelosi is calling it the Trump virus at every opportunity right now, which makes Trump crazy because he keeps calling it the China virus. But, you know, it's almost a word game. I get your, I'm sorry, Jared, you finish your thought.
Because I'm really mad right now. I mean, I'm almost ticked off. I mean, that could have been the coronavirus. And my father's 67. He's still working, 67, and he could have died. We're almost reaching 200,000 dead in America with 4 million cases. No other country on earth is dealing with this the way we are, because they have governments that actually somewhat function, unlike ours. And it's just, I feel like, you know, it's easy to point the blame at Trump, and he should get the blame. He should be in The Hague and, you know, just put the cuffs on him at this point, like literally citizen's arrest at this point. But I mean, the Republicans are also responsible too. I mean, Mitch McConnell, I mean, if Trump goes to The Hague, then Mitch McConnell should be his cellmate, basically. I mean, they've spent all these years cutting, defunding the CDC, health care. They've been blocking universal health care since forever. And a $1,200 stimulus check is not going to cut it. Like, we need a radical socialist program that puts we need a government of action to fight for working families. That needs to be our slogan.
Yeah, I agree. And I almost, I didn't want to step all over Jacob Soboroff because his time was tight and he has a lot to say. But when he asked, you know, why aren't these guys in The Hague, or he said he'd been asked that and he didn't have an answer, the answer is very simple. When George W. Bush was committing war crimes, when he was committing torture and kidnapping, there was an attempt to bring him before The Hague. It was done by a friend of mine, Michael Ratner, who has passed away now, but, you know, ran the Center for Constitutional Rights. And as a result of that, George W. Bush pulled the U.S. out of the International Convention, the War Crimes Convention. So we can't be held accountable at The Hague because we no longer participate with it. It's a horror. Jake, I'm so sorry to hear about your father. I hope he is well. It raises some interesting questions. We'll be right back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So this morning, every day I write a little rant that we post over at buzzflash.com Monday through Thursdays, and I share it with you. Typically, it's the first thing that I talk about when I go on the air. And I was looking over some of those rants that I've done in the past this morning, and I saw this one from March 24th. Now, keep in mind, we're going to be August this weekend. So, this is, 3 months ago? April, May, June, July, 4 months ago. And it was, the third week of March, it was as Americans were just starting to die in large numbers. I think, at that point, we were maybe at a few hundred dead Americans. And in that op-ed, in that rant that I did that day on the air and in that piece that we published on BuzzFlash, I asked the question, why? Why specifically had Donald Trump procrastinated for 2 months? Now, keep in mind, that was in March. We had our first case diagnosed on January 20th, as did South Korea. Same day, us and South Korea. They've had a few hundred people die. Total, we've had 150,000 die. They have crushed the curve, flattened the curve. Life is relatively normal again in South Korea, not here. So why did Trump initially procrastinate for 2 months? I asked this question back in March. Why did he procrastinate through January and February and early March? What happened? Was he trying to squeeze a few extra months of revenue out of his hotels? Was it that he was watching Fox News and he believed their spin and then he echoed it himself and then Fox picked up their echo and said it more and you got this horrible feedback loop? Was he creating a deadly right-wing feedback loop with Fox News without even realizing it? Did he procrastinate by a few months so that his billionaire buddies could unload all their stocks before things crashed? Was it because at some weird level Donald Trump actually wants to destroy America? Is he trying to punish us because he and his family were never accepted into high society? Because many Americans, look at him with disdain. He's gaudy, he's gauche, he's been accused of raping women. Is it that he's trying to punish us for not loving and respecting him? Why, if that's the case, if he's trying to destroy this country, he's obviously doing a very good job of it. Steve Bannon said their number one goal was to dismantle the administrative state. Deconstruct the administrative state was the phrase he used. Well, that's, geek speak for take apart the American government. Why would Donald Trump want to take apart the American government? Why is it okay with him? In fact, he seems enthusiastic about more Americans dying. Why, just yesterday, this morning, why is he continuing to push hydroxychloroquine, a drug that causes heart attacks as a side effect and kidney damage and has no impact at all on COVID-19, before, during, or after, none? Why is he doing this? Literally no other democracy in the world, functioning democracy in the world, has a leader who is doing this. Whose benefit is Donald Trump doing this for? Was it because he knew it was going to hit the economy and it would hurt his re-election chances, and he thought maybe he could just bluster his way through it the way he's blustered his way through everything else in his life? I think that's, probably the most charitable answer. But increasingly, I don't think that's the case. Why did he delay? Why did he delay those initial 2 months? Why has he now delayed 6 months? We still have no national program to deal with COVID-19. None. There's no national mandate. There's no national education. The message is completely incoherent. You've got, individual states each going their own way. And those red states that are running the libertarian, hey, you're on your own buddy path, they're melting down with COVID. And you've still got Ducey in Arizona and DeSantis down in Florida and Greg Abbott in Texas going, oh, that's not my problem. I mean, in Arizona, the governor just a few days ago said, oh, okay, cities, if you want to mandate a mask, you can do that. Why? On March 24th, I wrote, this is going to cost tens of thousands of lives, deaths that are completely unnecessary, and it's going to wreak massive damage to our healthcare system and the people who work in it. Little did I realize in March that today it wouldn't be tens of thousands of dead Americans. It's over 100,000. we're going to have 250,000 dead Americans by the end of the year if we keep going down this path. So here we are 4 months after I asked that question, 7 months into this pandemic, 150,000 people dead, and I'm still asking, why? Why do you think Donald Trump is doing this? Is it that he is so into his own magical thinking that, I mean, he continues to insist that the Central Park Five actually, raped and tried to kill that young woman. It turns out, obviously they had nothing to do with it, but he's still arguing occasionally that Obama wasn't born in America. Is it that he just like makes crap up and then that's part of his psychopathology? He has to believe it. Does he believe that this thing is going to go away? Did somebody tell him once, it'll be like the flu, it's seasonal. It'll be, it's just going to, don't worry. And he's internalized that? Or is some oligarch whispering in his ear? We know that, Freedom Works and some of the groups supported by the Kochs and others, other right-wing billionaires are saying, reopen America. Or is it some foreign government that wants to see America brought to its knees? Is it the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia? Is it the president of Russia? Is it the president of Hungary? Why is he doing this?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
America deserves an answer, and this is the one question that I've never seen the media even really seriously attempt to answer. Why?
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stop Being Reasonable, How We Really Change Our Minds by Eleanor Gordon Smith. This is from the introduction. Somewhere in the technological belt of California, where the only thing more precisely engineered than the software is the people, or maybe the people's teeth, lives an organization called the Center for Rationality. For the low price of $3,900, the center will sell you a 4-day workshop on reasoning, during which participants eat, sleep, and take part in 9 hours of back-to-back activities together daily under one, presumably rationally designed roof. This year, like every other year, the center will receive hundreds of applications from people who want to attend because, as they put it, everyone I know is irrational and I want to fix them. These folks make for an easy punchline, a good group to laugh at, but it turns out many of us make a version of the same mistake when we think about persuasion. We think we know what it is to change our minds rationally, and the only question is why other people don't do it more often. The ideal mind change is calm. It reacts to reasoned argument. It responds to facts, not to our sense of self or the people around us. It resists the siren song of emotion. People like to talk about the public sphere, if there is such a thing. Then its convex edge reflects this idealized image back at us. Think of the number of programs dedicated to the mind-changing magic of two sides saying opposite things. Meet the Press, State of the Union, Face the Nation. The branding of these things often bakes in a little reward. How brave I am for attending the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. How clever for my subscription to the Intelligence Squared debates. The proper way to reason, at least according to our present ideal, is to discard ego and emotion and step into a kind of disinfected argumentative operating theater where the sealed air conditioning vents stop any everyday fluff from floating down and infecting the sterilized truth. Years ago, I used to share this view. I'll tell you why, even though it will rightly want to make you take my lunch money. When I was in school, I was a champion debater, which was another way of saying I spent my weekends wearing a blazer and telling people in precisely timed intervals exactly how wrong they were. My teammates and I constructed arguments for 20 hours a week, putting premises in the crosshairs with the unblinking accuracy of people whose whole egos were on the line. We weren't bad either. Eventually, we made it to the World Championships in Qatar, where we wore blazers embroidered with the Australian coat of arms in gold and competed in what looked, in hindsight, like a scene in an apocalypse movie just before the purge begins. All of us in matching uniforms on fleets of white buses being shepherded through the desert haze to auditoriums where we would sit locked up together for an hour, surrounded by stopwatch-wielding officials. Debating left me with an attitude toward persuasion that was as precise as Euclidean geometry. Find the foundation, show why it's wrong. Buttress analysis with evidence. Emotion is for decorative flourishes only. Do not expect it to be load-bearing. Of course, I knew you could change minds by appealing to things like emotion or your opponent's sense of self, but doing that seemed kind of base. It felt nobly sportsmanlike to arm yourself with argument alone. It was the intellectual equivalent of turning up at dawn for your duel with your pistols shined and paces counted. It was how you were meant to fight. This perspective began to change after I produced a piece for the radio show This American Life in 2016. The idea had seemed simple. Turn around to my own catcallers, men who had wolf whistled or made sexual comments to me on the street, and try to reason them out of doing it again. I spent hours giving these men all the evidence, all the reasoning, all the fancy footwork with premises. But after dozens of conversations, I walked away defeated. Over and over again, they walked away from our conversations as sure as they'd ever been that it was okay to grab, yell at, or follow women on the street. These men didn't seem fundamentally irrational or unstuck from reality. In fact, in a funny sort of way, I quite liked a few of them. One told me he modeled his courtship rituals on the animal kingdom. I'm just another paradise bird flaunting my stuff, he said triumphantly, as though this explained everything that needed to be explained. That's a good line. He made me laugh, but I couldn't change their minds. The experience deflated me, not just as a person and as a woman, but as someone who has always been optimistic about our ability to talk each other into better beliefs. We finished recording in November 2016, right after the U.S. general election, which set up a grim backdrop for a newly found pessimism toward rational debate and persuasion. But when the piece aired, a strange thing happened. I was inundated with interview requests. Could I write a 10-step guide to changing minds? Would I accept an award for the successful use of rational persuasion in public? What advice did I have for talking people out of being workplace harassers? I was astonished. Large numbers of people had apparently listened to my conversations with catcallers on the radio, conversations that I had walked away from feeling dejected and defeated, and heard instead instances of persuasive success. I think the explanation is that these conversations bore a sort of Madame Tussauds-like resemblance to what we think good mind changes look like. I said one thing, my catcaller said the opposite thing, and each of us tried to explain why we were right. I had stayed calm. They had been prepared to hear me out. I had used statistics. It looked for all the world like a rational debate, and the fact that I had failed to change any minds with this approach disappeared under the shadow of the unquestioned assumption that I deserved congratulations for even trying. I started to smell a rat. The book Stop Being Reasonable by Eleanor Gordon Smith.
That we may have hit a tipping point for methane in the Arctic. Professor Richard Wolff drops by to discuss a pandemic tax to help fund the COVID-19 recovery for the common good. Kevin Camps of Beyond Nuclear visits to connect the FBI raids of the Ohio House Speaker to the billion-dollar bailout of two very dangerous age-degraded nuclear power plants. And in Geeky Science is a new study out about how sitting confuses your body's fat or fit system. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Wow, Donald Trump is going all racist all the time. This is his Hail Mary, right? He has concluded that he is so far behind that the only way he can win this election is to get as many racist white people to the polls as possible. And maybe he can squeak it out. He just tweeted this insanely racist tweet. I am happy to inform all of the people living their suburban lifestyle dream. Now, you and I know he means white people living their suburban lifestyle dream that you will no longer be bothered or financially hurt by having low-income housing built in your neighborhood. And we know that what he means by low-income housing is black people. This is not even code. This is not even dog whistle. This is skywriting. He said your housing, this is his tweet just a little bit ago. Your housing prices will go up based on the market and crime will go down because I have rescinded the Obama-Biden AFFH rule. Enjoy. This is a follow-up to a Facebook Live tele-rally. Now that he's trademarked the word, he can charge his own committee and his own fund. He can pay himself to do these things. This was last night to people in Iowa. He did an Iowa rally. And he said Democrats want to end school choice. They want to abolish charter schools. It's ridiculous. They want to abolish and really hurt the suburbs because that's their plan. That's very much agreed to by them. They want to make it worse. He said they don't mind if low-income housing is built in a neighborhood in a beautiful suburb of Iowa or a beautiful suburb anywhere in the country. Again, he means black low-income housing in white suburbs. Come on, let's just acknowledge what the president of the United States is saying. He says they want low. This has been going on for years. Obama, that black president, made it much worse. And now they want Cory Booker, that black senator. Now they want Cory Booker to run that program. Cory Booker, that black guy from New Jersey, where there's all those black people, to run that program and make it many times worse than it is right now. And last night he goes on to say people have gone to the suburbs. He's talking about white people have gone to the suburbs. They want the beautiful homes. They don't want to have low-income housing developments built in their community, filled with black people, of course, which has reduced the price of their homes and also increased crime substantially. By the way, in the meantime, the Department of Health and Human Services published a study of what happened when a low-income housing development was put into a white suburban neighborhood in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. According to the Department of HHS, quote, it was not associated with trends in crime, property values, or taxes. And, they have mitigated potential negative externalities. In other words, no big deal. Oh, but Donald Trump, he's got to turn this into a thing, right? This is going to, I'm telling you, he has been running on racism since 2015. He's been promoting racism since he was a kid, since he was, working for his dad and writing C for colored on the applications of black people who wanted to rent properties in their low-income housing. Jared Kushner's a slumlord. That's his major source of income. It's breathtaking. Here in Oregon, Governor Brown, has announced that there will be a phased withdrawal of federal officers from Portland. This is at the same time that Trump this morning was saying, we're going to get rid of them. Say what? Really? He said, we're going to have to go in and clean it out. He's talking about Portland. We have to clean out their city, and we're going to do it for them. He said we're going to get rid of people. How did that work out? Back in Germany, how did that work out? How did that work out in Chile under Pinochet? Oh yeah, we're going to get rid of people. Why are they leaving? Well, it might be that this is backfiring on Trump. That his, throwing stormtroopers, secret police into an American city has actually brought out even more Republicans, more Lincoln Project ads. It might be that they don't want to pay the fines. Portland Commissioner Chloe Udele, apologies if I'm mispronouncing, is in charge of, Chloe is also the head of the Transportation Bureau here in Portland. I kind of laughingly referred to lightly referred to this as the parking ticket police. But basically that's what it is. And Chloe is fining the federal government $500 every 15 minutes, which is the maximum fine under Portland law for building a fence that crosses a bike lane. As of last night, the federal government owed Portland $100 and some odd thousand, $192,000. And every 15 minutes, it goes up by $500. Meanwhile, last night, Tucker Carlson, remember this video that Trump and his son got basically, got deleted on Facebook and Twitter for broadcasting his Twitter of this video of this woman in D.C. who was claiming not only that lizard people are running the government, actual leftover dinosaur DNA, that the dinosaurs never went away, that lizards survived, but they can conceal themselves, they can hide themselves as humans. That's one of her arguments. She's got another argument that the reason women get cancer of the uterus or, endometrial cancer, cervical cancer, any kind of reproductive system cancer is because they're having sex with demons. Actual, like satanic, actual demons. She came out and said, oh, yeah, hydroxychloroquine. I'm using it with my patients, and I haven't lost a single one yet. Right. So Tucker Carlson played that video last night on Fox News. And then he said, this is mind-boggling. He called it a scientific advancement, that a drug that causes heart attacks and does not affect COVID at all is a scientific advancement. He says, any scientific advancement that reduces the suffering of Americans in an election year is a threat to Joe Biden's campaign. Now, if Democrats want to erase a politically inconvenient news story fewer than 100 days before the election, they can do that, and they did do that. Right. And they pulled the video of doctors in lab coats talking about coronavirus research, and they hid that video from the public. But I'm going to show it right here on Fox News because we don't care if people die. He didn't say that last part, obviously, but, what other conclusion can you come to? This is just crazy. Debbie in Oakland, California. Hey, Debbie, what's on your mind today?
You asked why Trump was doing this, why he's letting all those Americans die. Have you ever heard of Malthus? I only heard.
You're talking about Robert Thomas Malthus?
I think that's it. He believed in killing poor people.
Well, Malthus's theory was that if you increase the food supply, you're going to increase the population, and the population will increase to the point where it exceeds the food supply, and then you're going to have starvation, and the population will collapse. And he projected or argued that, this was in the 16 or 1700s, argued that over time what you would see is these cycles of boom and bust with regard to population as population and food supply interacted. Malthusian theory really informed Paul Ehrlich and his wife when they wrote The Population Bomb back in the 70s. Say what?
I've heard there are neo-Malthusians, and, let's face it,
yes.
Trump is stupid, and he might have thought this is a good idea to kill poor people.
So get rid of the useless eaters is what I think how libertarians refer to unemployed people. Yeah, it may well be, Debbie. It may well be. That's as good a reason as I've heard from anybody else. Philip in Waukesha, Wisconsin. Hey, Philip, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I got a couple answers to some of your questions, my opinions, I guess. Maybe 3 or 4 of them I can give real quick. First of all, right off the bat, the number one thing is when the reason he didn't do anything is because the main thing in this is everybody knows he's totally incompetent. He can't do anything. He's a failure at business. He's a failure at school. He's just a failure as far as anything like that goes. The other thing is that Donald Trump does hate this country, and I think you might have mentioned this earlier. He demonstrated this about how he wants to be loved when he had all of his cabinet members when he first became president just say nice things about him at his meeting, like, just say what you think about me. He has to hear that. And I think he's getting back at America for that because he knows the majority of people, here and there do dislike him. And I also think that if you would take, if there, were a devil and someone that was 100% evil, it would be Donald Trump. He is the most evil person I've ever known existed in the history of our world. If you take everything he does.
It reminds you of Hannah Arendt's comment about the banality of evil. Philip, I get what you're saying. I wonder if he thought, hey, as long as it's killing people in blue states, when it's in Washington and Oregon and New York and New Jersey and Connecticut, that's fine. And he never expected it to hit the red states. He thought somehow magically it wasn't going to. But now he's got a problem.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
That's just another theory, right? Why is he doing it? Is he doing it because somebody is saying, hey, you really need to destroy your country? and welcome back. Mary in Mill Creek, Washington. Hey, Mary. Thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Tom, I wanted to talk to you. I ran for state rep up here in the 44th Legislative District in 2012. A couple of things I've learned from that experience that I'd like to share is, first of all, mail-in ballots. Number one, if you're a state with mail-in ballots, send them in immediately upon receiving the ballot, because your name drops off the candidates list of voter contacts from the states as soon as your ballot's recorded. And that keeps you from being contacted by the campaigns. But more importantly, it really saves local candidates a lot of time and money, as they only need to contact those who have not voted yet. And we would get that list on Monday and Thursday of every week. Yes, and so it's, number one, it just saves the local candidates. I mean, I raised $150,000 for my campaign, for just a local state rep campaign. It wasn't even enough to touch TV ads or anything like that. The other thing I wanted to stress about this, and it's a little bit different because we're not doing doorbelling this time, but be kind when you're called. Don't get pissed when you receive mail, and answer the door. My campaign knocked on over 2,000 doors, and it was amazing how rude people were. I say reward their commitment. Local candidates have so little money for their campaigns, so doorbelling and phone calls are the least expensive way to get your name out there. Show respect for that commitment. Reward that commitment. Don't slam the door in their face.
Yeah, I've been getting text messages from campaigns, and initially it really irritated me because these are, I never asked for these. And but now I'm understanding it. Thank you, Mary, for helping me understand that. Finish your thought.
Well, it's just such a, and then I think that all of the reasons I just gave you are also, I think, why national mail-in ballots would be so much better. It's just such a more cost-effective. Everything about it, for me, was so much easier because it is overwhelming.
Louise and I voted 3 days ago here in Portland, Multnomah County. Our county has an election. There's only one race, right? I mean, it was literally one ballot with two candidates. Pick one of these two people. It came in the mail. We got it. We filled it out. We dropped it in the mailbox. It's postage paid. It's a no-brainer. You just sign the outside of the envelope and off it goes. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful.
The other thing I wanted people to know, because they can get really agitated about this, but, when you see no soliciting signs, that is for selling, soliciting and sales. But in Washington State, I believe it's every state, I'm not sure, but in Washington State, no soliciting signs does not include political campaighes. You're not soliciting.
I didn't know that no soliciting signs had any legal status. I thought they were just an assertion that, leave me alone.
Well, it is an assertion, but they can hold your campaign accountable if they're enough of a jerk and want to pursue it, But I'm just saying that in Washington State, when I got my my booklet from the committee to teach you how to run a campaign and everything, one of the things they said was you can just ignore the no soliciting signs. Political campaigns are allowed to hit every door. They're covered.
Fascinating. Mary, thank you for the call. And thanks for the education.
Okay.
I appreciate it. Great to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the sane among us. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with the hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. So for our Thom Hartmann Insider videotape that is over, or videotape, YouTube, whatever you want to call it, private video that's available over at ThomHartmann.com. I'm talking this week about Donald Trump just completely giving in to Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, the dictator of Turkey now. this theory that Jared Kushner okayed the killing, at least the capture, perhaps the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and to Mohammed bin Salman, and that Erdogan has the tape of it, and that when he called up Donald Trump a couple weeks ago and said, I want you to pull out of Syria and give me those Kurds so I can kill them and take that land, that he did it because Erdogan threatened him. And then Erdogan comes to the United States, a week or two later and gets a whole state dinner thing. Check it all out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. I think you'll find it fascinating. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And boy, what a day, right? What an amazing day. Terry in Palm Coast, Florida. Hey, Terry, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Good afternoon. I read an article in the Wall Street Journal today that says that Trump awarded Kodak $765 million loan to produce hydroxychloroquine, among other medications. And I wondered if you were aware of this, and if so, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, Louise and I were talking about this morning. She has been following that story more closely than I, and I'll probably have a more informed opinion for you tomorrow. I haven't read that Wall Street Journal article, but I will do so. My understanding is that this might actually be, setting aside the hydroxychloroquine part of it, this might actually be one of the good things that the Trump administration has done, which I'm gritting my teeth as I'm saying, but the fact of the matter is that the majority of our drugs are actually, the raw materials are made in China, and the drugs are put together in India. And in fact, this newsletter that I got from a pharmacy in Canada that I've used in the past, they just sent me this a couple days ago. They said the cost of the raw materials from China needed to make various drug products are skyrocketing. And with raw material costs soaring by as much as 360%, drug companies in India are lobbying their government to exempt them from mandated price controls so they can recoup these costs. And in other words, our drugs are going to start going up in price. And one of the things that Peter Navarro has been advocating for some time now inside the Trump administration is that we make drugs in America again. So, that's all I know about it right now, Terry. I think making drugs in the United States is an important thing, I think, both for national security and for, just basically health security. Whether Trump is doing it the right way, the wrong way, how they're doing it, what they're doing, I'll have to fill you in later on in the week. Terry, thank you for the call. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. I wanted to give you my reason why I think Trump does what he does. And to be quite honest with you, there's 63 million other, Americans that do what they do. All right, I just want to say real quick something about myself. All right, the first person I voted for when I was old enough to vote was Ronald Reagan, okay? And I was 18 years old. And I had a friend, and his father was from Hungary, okay? Now, his father was very well known in my small Illinois town that I grew up in. But his father was by all observations, a great American, all right? He flew one of them huge American flags on his TV antenna. And long story short, the guy was an unapologetic and proud, frankly, Nazi. He had his Nazi uniform from when he fought with the Nazi army in Hungary. He had it encased in plastic, a plastic box. Yes. And I learned a lot from just interacting with him. I don't know if you've ever actually known a real Nazi or not. I don't know if any.
I have actually. I've known several German Nazis. I lived in Germany for a year, and I got to know some of these really old. I knew one old guy who still thought that the cause was righteous, and I knew a bunch of them who were horribly embarrassed.
Well, then you know where I'm coming from. Okay, there are unapologetic Nazis out there, and he was very. He loved America, but he thought America was misguided. Okay, now flash forward. Flash forward to my experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. I noticed a big change that a lot of people didn't really quite understand, but I understood it once I analyzed it. I saw a big change between when we went from the combat phase in Iraq to the nation-building phase. I saw a lot of just real resentment for, human rights, a lot of disdain for frankly, things that America stand for, okay? And these things manifest in certain ways. Like, here's one thing nobody ever talks about. In Iraq, there was a lot of just wanton murder of dogs, stray dogs, because Iraq is Arabic, right? And they don't keep dogs as pets, generally speaking, all right? And there's a lot of stray dogs, and I saw a lot of Americans do sadistic things, out-of-character sadistic things that they wouldn't normally do. And anyways, it's a big, huge, long story, and it's a big concept, but I'll just give you the short thing and let you riff on it if you want. I honestly believe
you have 30 seconds,
they simply do not like to be Americans, and we need to figure out a way to deal with that. Maybe we can just ignore it. Go ahead.
No, I think we have fascists in our midst. I mean, and we always have. But now they're well armed and they're organizing into groups, and they're doing it in large part because Donald Trump has basically called for it. He's put out the call. And he explicitly said it back during the campaign. I've got the bikers, I've got the police, I've got the tough guys, I've got the Second Amendment people, and we have fascists in our midst, and they're killing us. They've been killing us ever since but Tim McVeigh, actually even before that. But Tim McVeigh was kind of the kickoff of the modern murderous fascist movement. And now they've moved into the mainstream, and I think that they're infiltrating these protests, and provoking and providing Donald Trump with the visuals that he wants, and Bill Barr, and I think it's bringing out their fascist tendencies.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our selection today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is This Land, How Cowboys, Capitalism, and Corruption Are Ruining the American West by Christopher Ketchum. This is from Chapter 1. It's about halfway through the chapter. He's talking about Bernard DeVoto. DeVoto was the first major historian of the West who was also an environmentalist and an activist, the first chronicler of what Wallace Stenger called the West's curious desire to rape itself. DeVoto was a Westerner raised in Utah. He suffered in the provincialism and intolerance of Mormon country, went east to study, and then teach at Harvard, settled in Cambridge, but never forgot the beauty of his native ground. Loving the land and history, said a magazine profile, but loathing the society. His histories, novels, criticism, his essays in Harper's Magazine were for 20 years, where for 20 years he wrote the oldest column in American journalism, Easy Chair, pointed always west. His trilogy, published in the 1940s, The Year of Decision, Across the Wide Missouri, and The Course of Empire, garnered the Pulitzer, the Bancroft, and the National Book Award. Widely celebrated, Devoto used his position to become his generation's most outspoken defender of the public lands. He called the West a plundered province, a resource colony for corporations and absentee landlords who practiced, quote, an economy of liquidation. He was broad in his assault on the liquidators. He went after the timbermen, the mining companies, the stockmen, the cattle barons, the oilmen and gasmen, the overgrazers, the deforesters, the denuders, the profiteers of gold rushes and grass rushes. He named the bankers and congressmen who abetted the plundering, the Western hogs, he called them. They've been busy for a century laying waste to the West. Long before the public domain was vested with any permanence legally in the hands of the American people, before there was a consideration of the land itself or any environmental ethic, the West had been torn up, beaten down, subjected to the greed and profligacy of the commodity users. Ironically, the users, in their race to liquidate, helped drive the creation of the public land system we know today, as they proved the need for federal stewardship to stop their abuses. Massive timber frauds in the 19th century, the largest land frauds seen in the West, led directly to the establishment of the Forest Service in the 20th century, its purpose to stop deforestation. Out-of-control cattle numbers in the steppe, overgrazing that turned the fragile soil to dust, led directly to the federal grazing regulatory system that eventually became the BLM. When in 1946 the commodity users conspired to destroy the public land system, the system in which Devoto saw the only hope for Western conservation and preservation, he stood to oppose them. Quote, he was the first conservationist in nearly half a century, except for Franklin D. Roosevelt, to command a national audience, said Arthur Schlesinger, Jr., a student of his at Harvard. No one did more in the post-war years to rouse public opinion against the spoilers than Devoto. Devoto and Schlesinger had seen firsthand what unregulated industry could wreak in the arid lands when they drove cross-country together in the spring of 1940 and entered western Kansas past the 100th meridian. These were the last years of the Dust Bowl before FDR's soil conservation programs and the return rains of the 40s could heal the land. Wrote Devoto, a cemetery was 10 inches deep in sand. Half the headstones had toppled into it and been partly covered. Sagging shacks that had been farmhouses had their windows blown out, and dust was 2 or 4 or 6 feet deep against their western walls and a foot deep against the far wall. A repulsive dust as fine as sifted flour. Now, 6 years after that trip with Schlesinger, Devoto was confronted with the West's cattle barons, the liquidators of the grass, who were hell-bent on reducing the region to the same mess of dust. In 1946, the Joint Committee on Public Lands of the American National Livestock Association met in Salt Lake City to discuss the goal of undermining what few regulations had been placed on livestock operators under the newly formed Bureau of Land Management. The stock growers' ambition went further than mere deregulation. They hatched a plan with the help of friends in Congress to begin moving all federal land, the BLM and Forest Service domain, as well as the national parks, into the control of the states. The plan evolved through 1946, 47, 48, with legislation making its way on Capitol Hill. Devoto covered the story for Harper's. He cautioned that the stock growers were attempting, quote, one of the biggest land grabs in American history. The public lands are first to be transferred to the states on the wholly justified assumption that there should be a state government not wholly compliant to the desires of stock growers. It could be pressured into compliance, he wrote in Harper's. Nothing in history suggests the states are adequate to protect their own resources or even want to, or suggests that cattlemen and sheepmen are capable of regulating themselves even for their own benefit, still less the public's, end quote. The long-term plan, he said, was to get rid of the public lands altogether, to place the common possession of the American people into private hands. The livestock industry went on the attack, mounted a PR campaign to Devoto, and pressured Harper's to cease its support. Unmoved, the magazine continued for 3 years to publish his relentless exposés of the intrigues in the state houses and in the Western caucus. Devoto had convinced the editors, when no other publication that mattered in the East cared, that the threat of such land transfer was an existential one. This Land by Christopher Ketchum. Wretched of the Earth by France Fanon.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. So I just got my New York Times climate newsletter email thing today, and they're reporting on a new study that was just published in Canada where they looked at 6 National Hockey League cities: Boston, Chicago, Detroit, Montreal, New York, and Toronto. And in each one of those cities, we have records going back to the 1940s of high-quality backyard skating, ice skating rinks. And this is where, kids learn how to ice skate and they end up going into the National Hockey League. And so people take good, they keep good records. And I just want to share one sentence from this with you. In the winter of 1942-43, the first year of the original 6 era, that is these 6 cities of the National Hockey League, there were close to 60 days, 60 days when Torontonians could expect high-quality skating conditions in backyard rinks. Last year, there were about 20 days, from 60 days to 20 days. Something really big is happening all around the world. It is affecting our ecosystems. It is affecting our lives. And Dr. Stephen Amstrup is with us. He's the chief scientist at Polar Bears International, the co-author of another study that was just recently published. You can find it at polarbearsinternational.org. His Twitter handle is @polarbears. Great Twitter handle. Let's get into this. Dr. Amstrup, welcome to the program. Tell me about your study.
Well, thanks for having me, Tom. And the example that you gave of the disappearance of hockey rinks in Toronto is really very relevant to the disappearance of the sea ice and its effect on polar bears. Polar bears are one of the very few species we have that depends on a habitat that literally melts as temperatures rise. And back in 2010, my colleagues and I projected in a paper in Nature that we could lose about 2/3 of the world's polar bears by the middle of this century if we continued on an unmitigated greenhouse gas emissions path. What this study shows, the study that was released last Monday, shows not only that those general projections are true, but also establishes a timeline for when different populations within the global range of polar bears are likely to start to fail. And this is especially important to Canadians, where about 2/3 of the world's polar bears live in Canada. And, in Manitoba, for example, the community of Churchill is considered the polar bear capital of the world. But the polar bears that live there are going to be among the first to wink out. So this is a big deal.
Is that because that's in the context of the Arctic Circle, that's a relatively southward community, and therefore their ice is melting faster? Is that why?
That's right. And so the areas where we projected we would see the earliest declines are in the southern portions of the polar bear range, in Hudson Bay and Davis Strait, and then also in portions of the polar basin where currents continually take the sea ice as it's forming, take it into the center of the polar basin. And in the summertime, what that means is that there's no ice along the shore like there used to be.
Setting aside the aesthetic of cute, fuzzy animals going extinct, what is the larger story here? What does this mean for our ecosystems and the future of humanity?
Well, I think you put your finger on the most important point. My view is that polar bears and the message that they're conveying is important because of the impact that the global warming that humans are creating, the impact that that's having on polar bears is coming to all of us. And you mentioned hockey rinks in Toronto. A colleague of mine and I did some projections looking at future temperatures in Toronto. And by the latter part of this century, the climate in Toronto is going to look like the current climate in Washington, D.C. There are no hockey rinks in Washington, D.C., and, it's going to be a very
So
different
when does the southern third of the United States start to look like Death Valley? I mean, at what point does desertification, if I'm pronouncing that word correctly, the growth of deserts, it's been happening in northern Africa now since the 1980s in ways that are very measurable. It's happening across Asia. I don't think that we've seen it in a big way in the Americas, or have we? Is this already setting in?
Well, I'm not as familiar with some of the models that might project what we might see in the southern tiers, in the southern tier.
Because you're looking at the northern part. Yeah.
I'm looking at polar bears. However, I have looked at some models forecasting, for example, that by the latter part of this century, Davis, California, Central California, will have a climate more similar to that of Phoenix. Many people who saw me present that in a talk in Davis were very concerned because they didn't like that idea. And we are seeing a gradual situation where the arid climate of the West is gradually moving towards the Midwest at the same time that the more humid East is kind of building up more and more moisture. And so we're seeing in parts of the world or parts of the country much more significant rainfall events, and in other parts of the country, much more frequent and significant drought events. And these things have been projected by climate scientists for decades, and now they're coming to pass.
Yeah. Dr. Stephen Amstrup, he is the chief scientist of Polar Bears International, the co-author of this new study. You can read the whole thing at polarbearsinternational.org. Dr. Amstrup, thanks so much for dropping by. It's been great talking with you. And keep up the great work, please.
Thanks for your attention to this. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Other events in the news here. Florida, talk about burying the lead or having the wrong headline. The headline here at NBC News says Florida reported a record 191 coronavirus deaths overnight. But then you read the first paragraph where they say, yes, Florida set another grim record Tuesday with 200 more deaths. But in recent days, an ominous sight outside a funeral home has been sending a shiver through a Miami area town, a refrigerated trailer for storing bodies. Rumors that the corpses of coronavirus victims are being stored there and unfounded fears that the bodies could spread the disease, coronavirus, have sparked several protests in recent days outside the San Jose funeral home in Hialeah, Florida. Lillian Vasquez Acosta says that, who lives near the funeral home, she said, we went to the funeral home to ask about it. They told us they were at capacity and that they had COVID-infected bodies that they were storing in that container. The mayor of Hialeah, Carlos Hernandez, says, yes, there are bodies being stored in the trailer, but he said the trailer was moved out of sight on Tuesday into a fenced-in area on the property where the neighbors can't see it. And he adds there was never any danger to anyone. Right. Meanwhile, never any danger. Meanwhile, a new study that was just published shows, this is a recent study, it was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association's Cardiology Review. They looked at 100 coronavirus patients who had recovered. Only 2 of them required intubation. Most of them had mild cases. 78 out of the 100 still had cardiovascular abnormalities after recovery, with 60 of them, that's 60%, showing ongoing myocardial inflammation. They said the conditions, quote, appear to be independent of case severity and pre-existing conditions. So this is 100 people who had coronavirus. They just went back and said, hey, let's do MRIs of, or whatever, MRI exams of your hearts. 78 of them, heart damage.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So tell me again, why is Donald Trump allowing this virus to run rampant in the United States? Is it just because he thought it was going to kill people in blue states? And welcome back. Mike in Seattle. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I was just listening to Mary Trump's book, and I got through all 7 hours of it. And
oh my!
Think she
You got the book on tape.
Yes, and I believe it's a bestseller, and it needs to sell more because it really does get to the heart of the question. That family is all about money. The father, Donnie's father, was a mess, and he encouraged this activity. He didn't even have the decency to really take care of his elder son, who was supposed to be the heir apparent. And didn't even have the decency to tell her that he was in the hospital dying, said, ask your mother in the morning. I mean, her revelations are just unbelievable, and her summary is fantastic. So please, look at that. They are all about the money. They don't care about anything else, and that is so, so clear.
I get all that, Mike, and I can see where, when Donald Trump thought, well, this is only hitting states where, there's a lot of Democrats living, or it's not in any place where I have a hotel outside of New York, that maybe he thought that if he just kind of procrastinated on the virus for a few months, he could squeeze a few more months of revenue out of his properties. And frankly, I think that may have been one of his principal motivations. But, it seems like that would have evaporated by the end of May, when it was obvious that this thing was starting to... Go ahead.
He can't stand failure. He cannot accept failure. He cannot be told that he's a failure. Trump, you are a failure. Everybody needs to scream that, and he will go insane. Okay? Yeah. He cannot admit that he's failed at anything. That is one of his big problems.
Yeah, I got it. And I agree with Mike, thank you for the call. Steve in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, good morning there, Tom. Nice to talk to you here. When speaking of Phoenix here, the plants and the trees are stressed more this year than I've seen in the past, and we've been here for 30-some years.
Oh, it's going to be 105 just down the road from us, on the river here, on the Columbia River at the Dalles. It's never been that hot in that part of Oregon ever before. That's what Phoenix was like 20, 30 years ago on a bad summer day.
We still had our days higher than that, but you guys aren't prepared for that. I feel sorry for you guys,
Yeah. We're going to have another fire season.
Oh, God, yes, that's going to happen, too. The one thing I'd like to also mention, that ancillary things here. People are, I just had some abnormal tests that came back, and people have to go get further testing done, further MRIs, surgeries, and things like that. And you're not only scared on account of the medical consequences, you're terrified of getting COVID. But anyways,
who wants to walk into a hospital right now? So why do you think Trump is doing this?
Well, why I think he's doing it, he's had failed businesses, and Vladimir, I've mentioned this in the past once to you. Vladimir's got to have some goods on him. Either he's got Trump's debt over him or some other bad stuff. And I think every decision that he's made benefits Vladimir. In fact, I saw something today about his last conversation with Putin. Trump, it was not brought up about the bounty on our American soldiers' heads. Well, Vladimir's not going to bring it up, and Trump wouldn't bring it up. So one other thing I'd like to point out, if I may.
Steve, you may not. I'm sorry, we're out of time. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. In our special video for supporters of our program, people who sign up over at thomhartmann.com, this week it's the story of what the rich libertarian billionaires who have been funding the Libertarian Party and the Republican Party for, in a big way since the election of Ronald Reagan for the last 40 years, and have succeeded by owning politicians and owning the Republican Party in preventing us from even getting a public option, much less a national health care system. What they are doing, what their answer is, what their response is to the question, what do we do when things really go bad? When the economy's falling apart, when epidemic disease is sweeping the country, what do we do? Well, it turns out they've got an answer. It's just not an answer for all the rest of us. They're getting in their private jets and heading off to their private little bunkers. Seriously, that's what they're up to. So I lay out the whole story, complete with details and names, over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Thanks so much. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. This is another sad story about, again, why I'm trying to wrap my head around why Donald Trump is enthusiastically embracing essentially, 250,000 dead Americans by the end of the year. Why? How can this be a good thing? I get it that back in 1929, when the economy crashed because of, Republican deregulation of Wall Street back in 1921 with Warren Harding, when he got elected, his whole campaign thing was, basically, his slogan was, less government in business, more business in government, or words to that effect, close to that. And basically what it meant was privatize and deregulate. And so, he did. He massively deregulated banking, the banking industry in Wall Street in the 1920s. That led to the roaring 20s. The stock market went through the roof. Huge bubble. The bubble burst in October of 1929, and Herbert Hoover was president, a Republican. And for the next 3 years, he did nothing, essentially. I mean, he ended up in 1932 actually putting together some programs, but they were relatively small and relatively ineffectual, and they didn't do anything. Now, why did he not do anything? Because Herbert Hoover believed that the economy would eventually correct itself. And I get it that probably Donald Trump in the beginning, in January and February, when we really didn't know much about this new virus. I mean, this was a brand new disease. It had never been in the human population ever in the history of the world. We didn't know what its normal course was. We didn't know if it was seasonal. We didn't know if the virus was vulnerable to temperature or humidity, the way the flu virus is. We just didn't know any of this stuff. And so I think sort of he could be forgiven for saying, well, maybe it'll just go away in January. And maybe he could be forgiven for saying that in February, although I'm not forgiving him. Because I think by February, the science was in and it was pretty solid. I mean, we had known about this virus since the previous November. It was the previous November, that the United States intelligence services were notifying Israel that if this virus gets in the Middle East, look out. But by March and April and May and June, and now July is almost over, he knows that this is not going to go away with the summer. It's not going to go away with humidity or dryness. It's not going to go away with time. You saw this study where they looked at 100 people who had COVID and did MRIs of their hearts. These were all people who had recovered. Only 2 of them had a severe case and had to be intubated. All the rest of them had mild cases. And they looked at them months later and found that 78 out of the 100, as I recall, let me get the report. 78 out of the 100 still had ongoing cardiovascular abnormalities after recovery, with 60 of them showing, quote, ongoing myocardial inflammation. 78% heart damage from mild cases. We're just now starting to really, seriously look into this, and what we're finding is horrible. And still Donald Trump is saying, oh, don't worry, we've got therapeutics. He was this morning when he was talking to the press. He was like, I'm a therapeutics guy. Just take your hydroxychloroquine and you'll be good, which we know is a lie. Pilgrim Boston Hospital, a fellow by the name of Rudrish Patak, was in the ICU for weeks. He was intubated, and then they took the tube out, and he recovered. He recovered. Wonderful story. His family applauded him. The hospital, they came to wheel him out of the hospital, and everybody lined up in the aisle and shook his hand and applauded him. And then he died. 10 days after he was applauded, 10 days after he left the hospital, he died. He was one of, the story came out of a study that was published out of University College London. And they looked at 125 patients with COVID in that study, and 77 of them had strokes. Now, most of these strokes were minor. They produce things like, hey, your leg drags a little bit, or you have a hard time remembering names, or colors look funny, or whatever. They damage the brain, but not in ways that were life-ending or debilitating. But a lot of them were major. And what they found, they write, infections have long been known as a risk factor for strokes. With COVID-19, you're more likely to suffer a worse type of stroke with multiple large artery blockages in the brain, more severe disability, and a greater chance of dying from the stroke, according to David Waring, professor of clinical neurology at University College London. And that's exactly what happened to this fellow who left the hospital. Waring said evidence suggests 1 to 5% of people who have COVID-19 may have a stroke, regardless of their symptoms. He said there's growing evidence that the coronavirus may be linked to problems with the brain, including strokes in some people. 1 to 5%. We'll be back with your calls after this. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Is the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where smart people get their news. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it,
and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
In this week's Science Revolution, concerning news that we may have hit a tipping point for methane in the Arctic. Professor Richard Wolff drops by to discuss a pandemic tax to help fund the COVID-19 recovery for the common good. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear visits to connect the FBI raids of the Ohio House Speaker to the billion-dollar bailout of two very dangerous, age-degraded nuclear power plants. And in Geeky Science, a new study out about how sitting confuses your body's fat or fit system. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. So Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, is tweeting about how it took 8 days for a member of her family to get a COVID test back. And during that time, that person, who it turns out was positive, they didn't know for 8 days, that person infected 3 other people in their family. Had they simply known, they could have quarantined that person. Even Mick Mulvaney, right-wing crazy, former Tea Party congressman, acolyte of the Koch brothers. Even Mick Mulvaney is saying this is unacceptable during a pandemic when his own kids couldn't get tested, or one of his kids. The other one got tested and it took 7 days to get the results back. He says this is unacceptable. We've got a whole video about why this is, where the ideology that's driving, this is beyond incompetence. This is actually ideological. A new video out about this for the supporters of our program. You can find it over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Oh, this is entertaining. By the way, Trump this morning, when he was talking to the news on the way to Texas, I believe he's going right now. Texas? Yeah, it's Texas, because Louis Gohmert was supposed to go with him. He said, they asked him about Portland, and he said, oh, no, we're not leaving Portland. Well, yesterday, our governor had negotiated a withdrawal of the feds from Portland. Today, the feds are saying, guess we're not withdrawing. The president just said we're not going to leave, so we're not leaving. We'll see how that works out. Over at Politico, Jake Sherman is reporting that when Politico reported that Louis Gohmert had tested positive, that guy, Louis Gohmert, that he had tested, the congressman from Texas, if you're not familiar, one of the most Gomer pile stereotypical politicians in America. I don't know how to put it beyond that without sounding like I'm trash talking, a whole group of people. But, golly, that's Gohmert. That's Louis Gohmert. He went back to his office after he tested positive yesterday to talk to his staff. And this is mind-boggling. And so when Politico reported this, when Jake Sherman reported this, one of his staff members, one of Louis Gohmert's staff members, reached out an email to Jake Sherman. And they're reporting this over on Politico.com and said, Jake, thank you for letting our office know that Louis tested positive for the coronavirus. When you write your story, can you include the fact that Louis requires the full staff to be in the office, including 3 interns, so that, quote, we could be an example to America on how to open up safely, end quote. When probing the office, you might want to ask how often people were berated for wearing masks. Gohmert yesterday was also in close proximity to Bill Barr. Well, that could be interesting. Back in June, he told CNN, if I get it, you'll never see me without a mask. We'll see. So far, a number of members of Congress have gotten this virus. Mario Diaz-Balart, the Republican from Florida, Neil Dunn, Republican from Florida, Morgan Griffith, Republican from Virginia, Mike Kelly, Republican from Pennsylvania, Beth McAdams, a Democrat from Utah, and Tom Rice, a Republican from South Carolina. Jake Sherman and his team, Anna Palmer, Garrett Ross, and Eli Oken over at Politico all emailed all the members of, well, I'll just read you what they said. He writes, we emailed 3 people in Gohmert's office this morning. Once we heard about the positive test, they all ignored it. When we finally got Connie Hair, H-A-I-R, Gohmert's chief of staff, on the phone. This is strange. Connie Hair? He's bald? Anyway, when we finally got Connie Hair, Gohmert's chief of staff, on the phone, she said she would not answer any questions because Politico is a, quote, propaganda outlet. It's mind-boggling. Absolutely mind-boggling. Susan in Chiefland, Florida. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Did you catch the article that started on HuffPost, which says how quack doctors and powerful GOP operatives spread misinformation to millions? It was
no, but I'm familiar with what's going on.
It's all Facebook, and it had over 10 million viewers, and they call it a plandemic. They encourage people not to wear masks, not to lock down. They're pushing for the schools to open. Like anybody in Florida, my state is a wreck right now. And I have to ask, at what point does it become a class action suit when a governor puts the population in such direct danger? I mean, not even masks.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you, Susan. They want to
kill off the population. You said, I don't know when, weeks ago, maybe it was aimed at the black community somewhat, possibly aimed at seniors because it'll cut the Social Security numbers. Whatever it is, they want this thing to just rip through Florida and Georgia. I mean, California, at least they have a governor who cares, same as New York. But Florida is really crazy right now.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it's just, I'm at
when
a
you
loss
say
for
it's
words.
ideological, I mean, ideology implies a person has the right to their opinion, but when ideology becomes a kind of genocide, which is what it seems to be moving towards, My state has almost 500,000 people infected that they know of. They don't test everybody. I mean, it's not being in any way contained, and they are pushing to open the schools. I mean, at what point does the UN send in some kind of clemency squad? I don't know.
Yeah, it's nuts. And if this is ideological, and this is how it's being characterized by some people on the right, by some of these right-wing groups, you know, the Tea Party patriots, et cetera, ideology there has to be some consistent through line to an ideology. You know, we believe that this is the case, and therefore, if we do this, that will happen. There has to be some, you know, something that can be replicated, something that can be demonstrated. And the only ideologies that I can come up with that Donald Trump might be following are, number one, and I pointed this out in the week of April 6th, that on April 6th or April 7th, when the New York Times, the Washington Post, NBC, ABC, CBS, all CNN, Fox, all the media on one day reported that, hey, we just discovered that most of the people dying are black or Hispanic. That was the week. That was literally, honest to God, Susan, the week. In fact, I wrote an op-ed about this. That all of a sudden, all these right-wing groups who had been saying we need to lock down for a couple months and get this under control, all of a sudden they were like, oh, time to open back up. It doesn't kill white people. And,
I totally agree with you, but it is paralyzing the hospital system in the state. A lot of people who are going to get treatment can't pay. That's going to end up making, you know, some of the cities bankrupt. So there's all kinds of ramifications beyond racism. And I also think it's a debate between science and religion, where these religious nuts think Jesus is going to protect them from COVID. And that's part of that whole let's not wear a mask, go to church thing. But they are getting everybody else sick. So there has to be consequences beyond just, hey, this is my religion or ideology. It's criminal neglect.
Yeah, it is. And it's not just neglect, Susan. A lot of this is actually proactive. Susan, thank you for the call. Well said. Sean in Cornell, New York. Hey, Sean, what's up?
Good afternoon, Tom. How are you? I appreciate you for taking the call.
What's
and
on your mind?
I'm walking, so I apologize. I had a question about in March in New Rochelle, when the pandemic first started, they literally brought the National Guard in and locked the entire area down. They got it under control. They stopped, and nobody's even mentioned
That's right.
it.
They had put a quarantine. They'd put like a 2-mile perimeter around this part of town with National Guard troops. I had forgotten that. It's amazing how much has happened. So anyhow, Sean, to your point.
And it worked. It worked.
Yeah.
And nobody mentioned it again. Why? In my opinion, if they would have went ahead and just, all right, they contain it there, now roll it out another, 5-10 mile radius, bop, bop, bop. I mean, the National Guard was literally there.
Yeah. And they're doing things, they have done, other countries have done things like this. Certainly China is doing this, although, my guess is that a Democratic governor in a Democratic state, New York specifically, your state, Sean, would be reluctant to do this in the current environment because you've got billionaire-funded right-wing groups, and you've got then Donald Trump, who claims to be a billionaire, suggesting that that's some kind of tyranny if the government, mandates that you wear a mask or that, Sean, that you shut down things. And they're concerned that this could be the sort of thing that actually could provoke that open war that so many on the right have been trying to have in the United States since Tim McVeigh blew up the federal building in Oklahoma City. Let's not forget, Tim McVeigh read the Turner Diaries, this novel that all these right-wingers love and quote, and believed. And in the Turner Diaries, a right-winger blows up a federal building, the federal government overreacts and starts collecting people's assault weapons, and the result is all the good white people with their guns rise up and kill off all the black and brown people and the Jews. And when we're left, it's just a nation of white people. That's literally the novel, and that's what these guys are gunning for.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So it makes perfect sense that, when they come out and say, oh, the virus is disproportionately killing black and brown people, that they would say, oh, hey, our ally, the virus. and welcome back. Shane in San Diego. Hey, Shane, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Good morning. I was calling in to talk about your question regarding why Trump is allowing this pandemic to just run rampant. And
right.
I think one notion I have about this is it comes from a line that I read in a review of Moby Dick years ago and kind of, to me, explains our polarized political climate right now. And that's that ideas are philosophical, attitudes are psychological. And it kind of goes back to what you were just saying about the
what does that mean?
About their. It means that when you're talking about philosophy, you're talking about science, you're talking about thought, you're talking about ideas. And I think what we have right now is just pure attitude all the time. There's no ideas underlying the ideology anymore. And
so then it's not a definable ideology.
Right. No, it's pure attitude having overtaken any kind of coherent philosophy. And I think that the realization that this is a problem that can only be solved by science and by ideas has Trump and his supporters immediately moved to reject any kind of intellectual solution in favor of pure anti-science attitude. And I think a big part of that attitude, maybe the sine qua non of the attitude, is a refusal to feel subjugated by nature. I think part of this is that they need to feel like they're dominating nature at all times, and testing, tracing, wearing masks, it doesn't feel very dominant. So, if shotguns could take out the virus, then you'd get a whole different attitude.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Shane, thank you for the call. Well said. I think you summarized it very tightly. Jessica in Chicago. Hey, Jessica, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I love your show and your listeners who help tweet.
Thank you.
Trump is hating the tweets. We have to keep fighting back. We're annoying him, and I got a couple tweets that if your listeners want to send them out. Number one tweet, hashtag Trump's killing everyone except the 1%. Number two tweet, he'll hate this, Trump virus skyrocketing. And then, of course, number three, Trump's evil, free the children. And for fun, Tom, I was going to say, maybe you're in Portland. Tell the protesters to take a break, stay home, and go on Twitter for one night. And wouldn't that confuse Trump? Nobody show up and everybody Twitter. I just feel sorry.
It's kind of a variation on the old slogan from the 60s, what if they gave a war and no one came?
I know, but they could go back the next day. Wouldn't it be fun to just really confuse him? Twitter, he hates it. And I just feel so sad for the people that are getting hurt. It disgusts me that he's hurting people. So
I agree. And there are a lot of people hurting very badly. And increasingly you're having, Jessica, thank you for the call, you're having entire families being wiped out. I mean, we told the story yesterday about this guy who was a Trump humper, right? He was one of the, and he infected his mother-in-law. She died. He infected his, he infected like 6 or 8 people in his family. Several of them died. He almost died. And he's now, I was a Trump humper, but no more. It's incredible. Coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Back with more of your calls right after this. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with a hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. So we're now at the point where literally millions of Americans have had friends, relatives, or neighbors die from coronavirus. And Donald Trump is not doing anything about this at all, other than saying, hey, we got a pill that will make you well. Don't worry. Be happy. Why? Why is he doing this? Charles in Hollywood, Florida. Hey, Charles, why?
How you doing, Tom? It's sickening to think that we've been taken over by conspiracy theory people that worship Confederate statues as idols, and they're supposed to be Christians. The thing that I think that might be a part of the answer to what you're asking is I've said it before, when President Clinton took over and our economy was doing so good, we actually had a surplus. And I think that, and when he was when he was in his final year, I remember clearly on CNBC, there was this lady, I think she was a congressman, but she was a Republican. And she was just crying and lamenting that they had to stop these taxes. These taxes were too high. And of course, we took all our businesses and went over, and they went abroad with it. But I think they also knew that with all it's also environmental, with all the pollution that they were doing, and I think they know that lots of America is contaminated, and of course they don't want to spend the money. They refuse.
So Charles, why is Trump letting people die?
Because it's all about the money. I mean, seriously, listen, they don't want to spend the money. They had the highest tax break ever, right? They got it set up where. Oh, so you're saying if Trump were to take proactive measures, it would cost money, and he would have to raise taxes on rich people, and that's why he's not willing to do it. Is that the bottom line? Exactly. I mean, like I said before, you knew it. They could set up. They could put the army out there. They could set up triages everywhere, and get this virus under control as far as separating people that got the virus, tracing it, developing faster methods to detect if you have the virus or not. But they refuse to because it's all about the money. And like I said, that's they don't want to invest in America anymore. So I'm hoping that the Democrats not only invest in America, but we set an example that we have power too, that the people that invest their vote in Democrats will also prosecute these people, will not let them get away with this. This is genocide. To take the American people. No,
I'm with you, Charles. I'm with you, and I got to move along to another caller. But thank you. You spot on. David in San Francisco. Hey, David, your thoughts?
My thought is that Trump actually owes Putin about $10 billion for swinging the last election and for disrupting the next election, not to mention the whole real estate deal before that. And I think his job as part of repaying that loan is to drag his feet, to flip-flop on masks for 6 months. It's just part of his job, man, to try to repay that giant loan.
To destroy this country. Yeah. David, it's...
Well, yeah, right.
There was a time when I would have dismissed that as conspiracy theory, but I can't dismiss it anymore. It actually makes sense. Dave in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, so I'm a pacifist, and I believe in nonviolence. And I know there's a lot of protests right now, and for the most part, they're peaceful and nonviolent. But, it's not really like a super organized thing, and there's always offshoots. And my fear is that that a violent act like burning a federal building or something like that would cause the country to react and vote in Trump. I just encourage people to do peaceful change, And,
so you're concerned that Trump is going to provoke a Reichstag fire kind of event, and yeah, I get it. I think that's entirely possible. Dennis in Muncie, Indiana. Dennis, what's up?
Yes, I just wanted to point out that coronavirus is going to be the third leading cause of death in this country this year, right behind heart disease and cancer.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Richard in Naples, Florida. You got 30 seconds, Richard. Oh, no, actually, we've got a little more time than that. What's up?
Okay, what I'm going to suggest is this, that we offer Trump a deal. He's obviously guilty of genocide, as one of your callers said. He's also guilty of treason with helping the Russians kill our soldiers. So what I would propose is that we offer him a deal, that he is entitled to claim insanity as a defense.
And use his niece's book as proof of it.
Well, that's good thinking, yes.
Yeah. Are you a lawyer, Richard?
Yes, I am.
So do you, in practical application, is this the sort of thing that the insanity defense would be used for?
My goodness, Tom, how many times do we have a president who's acted like Trump? This is uncharted territory.
Oh, we've never had a president act like this. I mean, Andrew Jackson did some crazy ass stuff. Slaughtering Native Americans and holding slaves and things like that. But that's about as close as we got, in my opinion. Richard, thank you for the call, and good to hear a legal opinion on this. Anyhow, we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, with more of the news of the day and your calls. So check it out and let your friends know how they can find good progressive media. There is good progressive media out there. However you're getting this program, that's a piece of it. Tell your friends and neighbors about it. And don't forget, democracy requires you. It's not a spectator sport. We have to get involved. Tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Be good to yourself and be good to the people around you. Reach out to somebody and say something nice to them, okay? See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm wrinkle reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!